Hey friends, today we are gonna see what if Naruto was tells Yasaka to shut up movie. A blur of orange could be seen speeding through the thick canopy of the forest surrounding Land of Rivers. Azure eyes were looking up, briefly catching his target every couple seconds before his form was hidden by the branches above him. He had only been back for a day, yet here he was, pursuing high-ranking criminals that had successfully managed to not only kidnap the Kazekage out of his own village, but also extract the Biju from him, which resulted in him dying, and if that was not enough, they didn't even allow them to take his body back to be buried. He was pretty sure he even heard one of their members talking about eating him. He wasn't going to let that happen though. He channeled a decent amount of chakra to his legs before bursting forward in a drastic increase of speed. His sensei, who was also in pursuit, was left behind as a result. "Oi, Naruto!" his sensei called out before clicking his tongue as he was forced to increase his own speed. While his student had gotten stronger than he was before he left, taking on a S-rank criminal was quite a jump from the spar he had with him and his teammate. Meanwhile, as his sensei was catching up to him, Naruto had overtaken his target and he skidded to a halt as he reached a clearing. Staring up, he narrowed his eyes as he began molding chakra inside of his body while forming the hand seals he needed while waiting. There, he came into his peripheral vision, flying on his clay bird while dropping small bombs behind him. If Naruto didn't know any better, he wasn't sure if he had noticed he was no longer behind him. He waited a bit longer and, now, he released his built-up chakra in the form of small, almost invisible wind bullets that shot upwards the moment his target flew over him. Even from his position on the ground, his enhanced eyesight allowed him to see his expression of arrogance morph into one of shock as one of the air bullets he had created punched a hole into the right wing of the clay bird he used for transport. "This is going to be a problem." His enemy, a missing nin from Iwa named Deidara, muttered as he watched his ride destabilize due to the hole its right wing now had. This was not how he expected it to go. The Jinchuriki was supposed to be brash, loud and easily goaded, and according to the intel only knew how to use the Shadow Clone and the Rasengan. There were no mentions of elemental chakra manipulation anywhere as far as he knew. So now Deidara could only think of what he could do next as he began losing altitude. Kakashi had finally managed to catch up to his student, just in time to witness his student's masterful display of elemental manipulation, his Sharingan eye tracking the chakra-created wind bullets and noting they were created in such a way one would have to be a master when it came to wind manipulation. It did raise some questions though, mainly why Naruto had not shown his ability to use high-ranking elemental techniques during their spar, and Kakashi could have sworn those blue eyes of his student seemed a bit more darker than usually. He made a mental note to ask Naruto about it later, when they weren't busy going after S-rank criminals, as he at least liked to know why. Naruto didn't even spare his sensei a glance as he once more took off, running into the direction he estimated his enemy was going to crash. He was right as he reached another clearing, though this one was not natural as several trees had been uprooted forcefully and branches had been snapped off from a few trees that were still standing around it. He darted his eyes around before his gaze landed on the clay bird that had been used as transport, due to it having crashed apart had broken off, revealing the body of the Kazekage that laid there limply with half of his body still covered. Wordlessly and without any hand seals, two clones poofed into existence, and with a mental command they went over to the bird where they started digging him out. As his clones were busy freeing the Kazekage, the real Naruto was scanning his surroundings with narrowed eyes. He couldn't have gotten far as the crash site was still fresh. Sniffing a handful of times, a metallic scent invaded his senses and he could smell blood, fresh blood. His eyes catching sight of a trail of dark spots that lead towards the bushes, and he guessed it was blood that had mixed in with the dirt. A glint entered his eye as he swiped his hand in a sideways motion. To a civilian it didn't look like anything special, but a shinobi, a well-trained one, would have caught the almost invisible blade of winds that was expelled by him. In Naruto's case, Kakashi had indeed caught it but quickly understood what he was doing, even as more questions filled his mind. The blade of wind he had created cut through the foliage with ease. Its sharpness could be compared to running a hot knife through butter as it continued its flight even after reducing the shrubbery to nothing. Unfortunately, Deidara managed to survive by throwing himself flat on the dirt ground, though he didn't come out unscathed as part of his long blonde hair had been cut off and he had a gash on his side which was bleeding by quite the amount. As his clones returned with Gaara on his back, a buildup of chakra was sensed coming from the crashed clay bird. This time Kakashi jumped in action as he was in front of Naruto in a blink of an eye. his hands already moving through a set of hand seals which he slammed into the ground as earth wall rose and covered both himself and Naruto from the explosion that followed. The earth wall did take a beating, but it did its job as it left the two unscathed from the attack. The dust that had been kicked up settled, revealing Deidara, who looked rather disappointed that his surprise attack had failed, and clicked his tongue. He needed to get out of here and fast, as the wound on his side was still bleeding and he could feel himself getting a bit dazzy. His chances of surviving went down by quite a bit as several chakra signatures were sensed before Guy and his team appeared, looking a bit roughed up but fine otherwise. "It appears you have this under control," Neji commented as he looked at the roughed-up enemy who was frowning in turn. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement, but other than that kept his focus on his target, ready to act at a moment's notice. His danger senses tingled as from all of the reactions he expected he would get off his target. Seeing him smirk was not it. Naruto tried to warn them as he saw his smirk widen and subtle movement of his right hand that was near his back, but he was just a little too late. "Katsu! Get back!" Naruto just managed to get his warning off before Deidara's body bulged in a rather grotesque manner as he exploded in an enormous ball of flames that covered the entire cleaning. They all backed away with the exception of Kakashi, who stood his ground. He channeled chakra to his left eye where his Sharingan lay, which had begun to spun and evolve. "Kamui!" His voice was drowned by the sound of the explosion before the space in front of him began to distort. Tears of blood began running down his cheek as Kakashi somehow managed to warp away the explosion. To both himself and his comrades it felt like it took forever, when in reality it was happening in only a few seconds. Naruto too couldn't help but show his surprise, as it was rather fascinating to him. However, his expression changed into a narrow-eyed one as he saw something happening near the explosion that was currently being taken care of. It was weird. It looked to be some kind of tear that was just there, floating and completely ignoring both the explosion and whatever technique Kakashi was using. Yet, that was not the only thing that got in his attention. He glanced down and his suspicions were confirmed as he noticed he was leaving drag marks and that he was being pulled closer. Quickly looking around, he noticed that the others were having the same issue as well, though they seemed to not have noticed. Frowning as he went over what could end up happening, namely Kakashi losing his balance resulting in the explosion that was still not completely taken care of reach them and likely end up with them either dead or wounded, as he himself had a good healing factor. Flickered his gaze between Kakashi's technique and the weird phenomenon, he could also feel it call out to him somehow. Knowing what must be done, he turned his face behind him with a small smile. "Tell Tsunade I am sorry," was all he said, confusing them, but before they could ask what he meant he sprinted forward. "Naruto!" they yelled, even Kakashi, though he kept his focus on keeping them all safe. Lee tried to run after him but was stopped by Neji, who put a hand on his shoulder. He wanted to protest, but Neji merely pointed, finally having noticed where Naruto was running towards before pointing at the ground near their feet. "Look, whatever he's going to do might have to do with that over there," as he had also noticed he was being pulled forward. They could only watch Naruto's back as once close enough he leapt upwards, but were still surprised as the tear in space just swallowed him, after which it disappeared without a trace. Neji even activated his Byakugan to see if this was some sort of illusion, but he couldn't find any trace of Naruto anywhere, nor could he sense his chakra around. By now Kakashi got done with warping the explosion away and covered up his Sharingan eye, which was burning from use as he looked around. "What happened? Where's Naruto?" he shouted, surprising them before Guy walked up to his friend and rival and, much like Neji had done with Lee before, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Kakashi, he's gone," Guy told him in a serious tone. "I don't know where he is, but he disappeared after jumping through something." "Sensei, I think Naruto saved us," Neji's voice rang out as he gestured for them to look down, which they did. "How?" Kakashi asked no one specifically, as he noticed he wasn't in the same spot he was in when he started his technique, as it seemed as if he had been dragged through the dirt for several feet without even noticing. "I am not sure," Neji mused as he investigated with his Byakugan. "It seems whatever it was that swallowed up Naruto was pulling us towards it as well. It looks like he jumped into it to save us, as it was pulling us towards it and could have caused you to either trip or lose focus." Guy nodded in agreement with his student's assessment as he came to the same conclusion after getting the information he was missing. "I understand, it's just," Kakashi didn't finish his sentence, but Guy understood. "Let's just meet up with your other student and bring the cage with us. We can look further into this after we're done." It was 2 days later when Kakashi and Guy along with their team reached Konoha. Though they all looked rather distraught, they hurried themselves towards the Hokage Tower, wasting no time for pleasantries as they had to report on what has happened. Just making their way towards their destination, they could overhear a few whispers as those who had seen or heard of Naruto's return noticed he wasn't among them. Reaching the tower, they went inside and headed upstairs where the office belonging to the Hokage was located. Kakashi knocked on twice on the door before opening it as he entered, followed by the rest. Looking at them from behind the desk, Tsunade had her fingers crossed as she glanced at each person in her office. She frowned, however, and did a double take as someone was missing, a certain orange-clad blonde to be specific, and wasted no time addressing his sensei. Kakashi, why is Naruto not here? She got no reply as the man averted his eyes downwards. Kakashi, answer the question. Naruto, he's gone. Tsunade-sama, he eventually replied as he found the strength to meet her gaze with his own regret-filled one. The silence that followed after that was more than enough to make a lesser man feel afraid as Tsunade was frozen from where she was sitting. Kakashi, you best be telling me a joke or there will be trouble. He's not lying, Tsunade-sama. Neji took a step forward as he came to the mon's defense. With the exception of Sakura, we all saw it happen but couldn't stop him in time. Wherever he went, I can tell I am not the only one when I say that his action may have saved us, as we wouldn't be here in your office otherwise. I second my student's words, Hokage-sama. Guy spoke up without his usual antics to show how serious he was. Seconds passed in silence as Tsunade just stared at the group in her office, making more than one rather nervous as they all knew how close she was to Naruto. Eventually she opened her mouth and made them swallow in fear of what she might say. Leave. I need some time alone, so just leave. I want to report tomorrow of everything. You're dismissed. She held back the tears that threatened to spill. Leave. She yelled as she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer after seeing them all still in her office. As they scurried out and left her alone, she leaned back in her chair and let her tears flow. Why Naruto? Beep, 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 mmhg. A groan left his lips as the annoying beeping sound he heard woke him from his calming sleep. He kept his eyes closed for the moment as he tried to move arms and legs, only to wince. He felt his body hurt all over. Beep, beep. He growled as the sound didn't stop, as he wouldn't mind going back to sleep, especially as the bed he was currently on was the most comfortable thing he had ever felt. Nothing even came close, not his own bed or the ones of the motels he had stayed in during his trip with Jiraiya. It was only when he remembered what had happened that was responsible for his current state that he opened his eyes, his deep blue ones staring at a strange machine that was responsible for the noise. He frowned as he stared at it, not recognizing what it was for, right as they didn't have these in Konoha. No, it looked much more technologically advanced. Even Spring Country, which is known for its advanced technology, didn't have machines such as these. After inspecting it for a while, he came to understand that it would beep in sync with his heartbeat, after which it pulsed. Rolling back onto his back with a grunt, he darted his eyes around and noticed he was in a rather decent-sized room that had Lil inside of it. There was the bed he was currently resting on, a cabinet next to the bed on the opposite side of the machine, and a couple paintings that hung on the wall far away from him. It looked very strange, even the paintings, as he couldn't recognize what it was of. His ears twitched as he heard the sound of a door being opened and looked to see a young woman walk into the room. She was quite pretty with her light brown hair and forest green eyes that were currently focused on some papers she was holding. "Hello," he greeted, his voice sounding a bit hoarse from being dehydrated. The woman looked up from her papers before letting out a gasp upon seeing him awake. Wait here for a bit." Not waiting for a reply, she turned around and left the room, leaving him once more by himself. Huh? He blinked as he watched her leave. What was all that about? He thought she would check up on him and not leave. Oh well, nothing he can do about it right now. As he felt his chakra start taking care of his aches, he furrowed his brows together and managed to tilt his head so he could look at himself. The reason for this was because he felt his chakra move in a more controlled manner. Not only that, but the quantity he held felt like it was much more. He didn't get to mull over it as the door leading to his room was once more opened and someone else walked in. Turning towards the newcomer, he looked only to immediately fight down the blush that covered his cheeks upon seeing the inhuman beauty. He already forgot that nurse from before. Make her way towards him with soft steps. She had long blonde hair done in a loose ponytail that went down all the way down her legs and ended in a spiral. It was paler than his own and seemed to have some sort of shine to it. Her face was perfect with delicate features. Her eyebrows were cut short, but it only amplified her beauty, and her eyes were a sparkling golden that looked at him with an almost smothering intensity. Her outfit consisted of a white haori with over it a red hakama that did little to hide her curvaceous figure, though he did his best not to stare. Hell, if Jiraiya had been in his place, he was sure the man would have died from blood loss upon seeing her. Yet, as he roamed over her form, he somehow managed to miss certain features of her that caused his eyes to widen. Behind her, swaying gently with each step she made, were not one but 9 golden-furred bushy tails, along with a pair of fox ears that were on peeking out of her hair. While it was quite shocking, it only made her appear much more beautiful. The word left his lips before he knew what he had done, and it only caused his still rosy cheeks to darken and his eyes to widen. She too had heard what he called her, at least he assumed so as he took note of the pink that dusted her cheeks. He wanted to apologize but was beaten to it as the blonde woman spoke up, having pushed down her blush from the rather unexpected compliment that he had graced her with. "You're up much earlier than I had expected." Her voice was both soft and soothing and caused his heart fluttered at the sound. "Tell me, what are you?" He opened his mouth to reply but paused himself and blinked. Hold on, did she just ask him what he is and not who? That made no sense, right? Though, his eyes flickered over to her tails. That was something he hadn't seen before during his travels with Jiraiya. Excuse me, but what do you mean by that?" Curiosity laced his voice as he asked her that question. He had expected her to ask for a name first. The woman narrowed her eyes slightly at him, looking him in his eyes to see if he was playing with her or speaking the truth. After a few seconds of looking into his eyes, her expression shifted from accusing into a soft smile. "My apologies, but I wasn't quite sure. What I mean is that I can sense chakra from you but seem to be a yokai. Likewise, I could sense something quite malicious coming from the area near your stomach, but I could tell it wasn't your own either. So once more I ask, what are you?" I am human," he answered, though the way he made it sound was like he wasn't quite sure of it himself. He had panicked for a brief moment when she mentioned she was capable of sensing the Kyuubi sealed inside him, but was relieved when she could also tell it wasn't him that radiated such malice. He actually wondered if she was related to the Biju, but threw that idea out as it sounded ridiculous even to him. At his answer, he was subjected to a scrutinizing stare of those mesmerizing golden orbs for what seemed like forever before they softened, and she nodded, though it didn't mean he was off the hook. "Very well, I'll accept that for now. What's your name?" "Naruto Uzumaki. What is yours, miss?" He trailed off and looked at her expectantly as she hadn't told him her own name. "Ah." The blonde brought her hands to her cheeks that held a light blush of embarrassment upon realizing she hadn't even introduced herself. "I am Yasaka, leader of the yokai here in Kyoto." She gestured towards the tails behind her that swished back and forth gently. Naruto stared at those appendages with awe as he wanted to reach out and touch them as they looked really soft. Ahem. She cleared her throat, which also pulled him out of his transfixed state, and he blinked before realizing he had been staring. "Ah, sorry Yasaka." He apologized as he scratched his cheek with one of his hands. She waved her hand as a sign that it was okay, though inwardly she was surprised by lack of a sama or dono suffix added behind her name. Not that she minded, however, it was rather refreshing to hear someone call her simply by her first name. "Wait." He looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "Kyoto? I haven't heard of a village called Kyoto before. Where the hell did it send me? Are we still in the land of fire?" It was Yasaka's turn to be confused as her tails paused their swaying. "Land of fire? And Kyoto isn't a village but a city in Japan. Are you sure you have never heard of it before?" A nod was her answer, and she could tell just from his expression he was telling the truth. "I see. This only brings forth more questions I have, though I also have some theories already in my mind. You appear in one of the field near the outskirts covered in blood with your clothing in tatters, and apparently have never heard of Kyoto or Japan, it seems." "Yes. Most definitely strange since you speak perfectly Japanese." A frown marred Naruto's face as she spoke as he tried to understand where exactly he was. No matter how hard he raked his brain, he couldn't come to an answer aside from that somehow, as weird as it sounded, whatever it was that he jumped into sent him to another world. Yeah, even in his mind it sounded unbelievable. "So, what now?" Naruto eventually asked as he looked at her. "Can I at least leave?" "Well," he let out a yelp as Yasaka took a step closer before pulling the covers off of his form and revealing his naked upper body. "Oh my," he heard her mumble in thin veiled amazement as she looked him over. His cheeks heated up and he shivered as she trailed her fingers over his form. They were soft, and so was her touch as her digits moved from his stomach upwards over his lightly muscled abs before coming to stop on an area just beneath his heart. Not a single scar present aside from this one. He felt his own fingers twitch as hers traced the edges of the only scar he had on his body, the one that had been given to him by Sasuke when he had shoved his Chidori-charged fist through his lung. Yes, I heal rather quick, he got out in a small hiss accompanied by a light chuckle, to which Yasaka nodded her head while continuing to run her fingers over his chest. So you think I can leave? I really hate hospitals, you know? He grumbled as he tried to focus his mind on something other than those fingers of her that kept tracing his scar. She giggled softly at his words, and he found the sound of her laughter quite hypnotizing before she pulled back her hand, making him suppress a small whine as she straightened herself after having lost focus on why she was here in the first place. Yes, you can, but I'd prefer it if you'd stay in Kyoto for now. At his confused look she elaborated, while it's true that you seem fine, which you explained is normal for you, you can never be too sure, correct? For all we know you might have some internal wounds you aren't aware of. Aside from that I am also curious about you. She sent him a look that made his cheeks heat up. You said you were human, but that shouldn't be possible since humans can't use chakra. Like I said before, I have some theories despite how weird they sound. Especially with your sudden appearance here in Kyoto and no signs of how you've arrived, though I won't go into those until I have a better understanding of who you are. Naruto Uzumaki. For Naruto, his choice was clear the moment she had told him he was in Kyoto, Japan, both which were places he hadn't heard of before. That, combined with the advanced technology he had seen, the lack of chakra present in humans, and the blonde fox woman in the room here with him, a yukai as she referred to herself, well, he had an inkling of an idea he was no longer in Fire Country. Hell, he had suspicion that with the weird phenomenon that happened back with Kakashi and the rest had sent him to a whole different world completely. Strangely enough, as he thought about his current situation, he couldn't find it in himself to be sad. In fact, it was the opposite, as a massive weight seemed to have been removed from his shoulders, a weight that had been placed on him by the presence of the Akatsuki that were kidnapping Jinchurikis such as himself. Here, in this world, they didn't exist. He didn't have to fear that a group of S-rank criminals was coming after him, as he very much doubted they'd be able to come here. He had no illusions that this world was without its own conflicts, but at least they didn't revolve around him. He paused as his thoughts started to derail before looking at Yasaka to see her staring at him and wait for his reply. I would like that, especially since I am unfamiliar regarding where I currently am. Thank you. He flashed her a smile as he spoke. Yasaka clasped her hands together at his answer, which was accompanied with a beautiful smile of her own. Great. I'll make sure you'll be good to leave, while I'll also have someone bring you some clothes. We can talk in private then. He thanked her once more before watching her turn around and leave, his eyes following her swaying tails that were moving with such grace with each step she took until she left the room and he was once more alone. Letting his head fall back onto his pillow, he shifted his gaze so he was looking outside. Unfortunately, due to the room he was in, he wasn't able to see much when looking outside of the window, as the only thing he could see were trees and the blue, cloudless sky for as far as the eye could see. He didn't even seem to notice his body heat up as his eyes slowly fluttered closed. Naruto blinked as he found himself standing in dimly lit hallways of the seal. He hadn't been here in quite some time. He almost forgot what it was like. He ignored the way his feet were submerged in the ankle-deep water and began walking. He had been forced here, as he sure as hell wouldn't have come here out of his own. The only way else was to be in a situation of life or death, and he wasn't last time he checked. So with that in mind, he trotted forward through the hallway until he arrived at his destination. It was a large room in which several massive golden bars could be seen, and he made his way closer. Naruto. He heard his name being growled before a fist twice the size of him slammed against the bars. He didn't show any reaction though, as the fist retracted itself before two blood-red eyes filled with anger aimed solely at him revealed themselves. You've made me angry, Naruto. Huh? He got out as he was unsure what he had done. And how did I do that? His answer came in the form of the Kyuubi moving closer to the bars and allowing the dim light to shine on its form. He looked the being over, seeing nothing wrong as he looked from its head down to its 6 long tails. Wait. He blinked. It looked again, and indeed there were only 6 tails as opposed to the 9 it's supposed to have. You noticed, now look down. All right, he muttered as he still wasn't sure what it had to do with him. Shifting his gaze downwards, he spotted his reflection in the water and raised a single eyebrow as he wasn't quite sure what he was supposed to see until he saw it. There, flittering behind him, were 3 golden furred tails much like Yasaka's own he had seen, with 2 fox ears peeking out of his hair which were ignored for now. He yelped as his head shot back up and he turned to grab a hold of them but was met with failure as the tails moved with him. The Kyuubi watched with an unreadable expression as its jailer began to chase after his own tails, literally before he had enough, and roared, "See what you have done! My tails, my beautiful tails! My pride, gone! You've stolen them from me, Naruto, and I am truly angry." Its roar was accompanied by a dose of malice that caused the boy to stop moving. But how? I didn't," he muttered as he continued to glance down at his reflection, taking note of other small changes he hadn't noticed before, mainly that he was taller than he remembered and he looked a bit more mature judging by his face, which had lost its baby fat and was a bit more angular. "It's because of your actions. You know how much of my own chakra I had to use to keep you alive. What kind of fool jumps into a literal tear in space without a plan? Traveling dimensions, even for an Uzumaki, is very taxing on your body. I don't know how, but somehow you've absorbed my chakra. If looks could kill, Naruto would be dead 10 times over, as even his previous meetings with the chakra beast hadn't been like this. Absorb. But wait, if I have tails, how come Yasaka didn't comment on them? She even asked what I was, and he rattled on, though he didn't miss the biju confirming that he was indeed in a different world, as incredulous that sounded. That blonde fox woman you seem to be crushing on? At his nod, the biju continued while ignoring the blush on the boy's cheeks and indignant sputtering. Simple. Unlike the other small changes your body underwent, you need to for them to show, or else they're hidden in the outside world. Naruto widened his eyes at that before closing them and reopening them. He turned his head and the biju was right, as he could no longer see the tails behind him. Hold on, is this also why I feel like I have much more chakra than now? Of course, stupid boy. Now leave my presence. With another deafening roar, Naruto was forced out of the seal as he regained consciousness. He let out a groan in annoyance upon being forced out. His eyes opened before he sat up, noticing the neatly folded clothes that were lying on the foot of the bed. Kicking off the remaining covers and seeing he was clad in only his underwear, no doubt his remaining clothing ended up destroyed if Yasaka were to be believed. He hopped out of bed and almost immediately fell on his face as he confirmed his earlier suspicion that he had indeed grown taller, as he wasn't used to his added height, not much but definitely an inch or two, maybe 3. Thankfully it didn't give him that much trouble as he pushed himself up and with slower than usual steps reached out and grabbed whatever clothing had been left for him to put on. He unfolded it to reveal a black kimono decorated with dark gray leaves and a burnt orange sash to go with it. Aside from that, there was a dark gray hakama that went in tow along with a pair of wooden sandals. He managed to put it with a bit of trouble securing the hakama properly, but once he had done so it fitted quite well. He then put on his sandals and spared the room one last look, thankfully that he did so, as he noticed the green necklace he had gotten from Tsunade still on the cabinet and quickly put it on and hid it inside his kimono. Making his way out of the room, he saw Yasaka there waiting for him, her eyes lighting up as she saw him arrive. As she looked him over, "I was right when I thought you'd look good in those clothes. You picked these clothes." At her nod he looked himself over and nodded. "I like them, they're comfortable and fit really well, even if I did have a few issues putting it on. Though, how did you find out my size?" "Oh, that? I had someone measure them while you were asleep." He had no retort to that. "Well, let's head towards somewhere more private so we can talk," she said with a smile before she took his hand in her own and began leading him out of the hospital. He didn't have much of a choice but follow her, as he enjoyed the direct contact between the two of them. His gaze would drift over to those bushy tails of hers that swished around and sometimes brushed against his arm. It reminded him of what happened back in the seal, and that apparently he now too had tails of his own. They were only 3 of them, but it were 3 more than he had been born with. He was surprised at himself that he hadn't freaked out now that he thought about it, but figured it was mostly because he could actually hide them. Hey, guess those names he had been called as a kid by the civilians of Konoha were true now. A dry chuckle left his lips at that. As they walked through the streets of Kyoto, Naruto let his eyes roam around as he took in every bit he could see. It actually reminded him of some of the villages he had traveled through during his training trip, but at a much larger size. And everywhere he looked he could see people with certain animal features. Others more noticeable than some, and they all came in different sizes. He didn't miss the looks sent their way as he and Yasaka made their way through, but figured it was normal. After all, he remembered her saying that she was the leader of these yokai here in Kyoto and Kyoto itself, and thus assumed it wasn't every day they saw her walking around with someone, especially not this close, even if she didn't mean anything by it. Strangely, though, he didn't feel unwelcomed by their stares. Their gazes held nothing but curiosity, which was already an improvement compared to his earlier years in Konoha, and he couldn't help but wave at a group of small children that were pointing their fingers at him. After walking for a couple more minutes in which he was treated to more of the city, they came to a stop as they had arrived at their destination. Whoa, Naruto whistled in awe as they stood in front of what he could only call a palace of what would normally belong to a daimyo. In fact, it brought forth memories of that one mission he had gone on when he was younger, which involved investigating a haunted castle such as this one. Though unlike the one of that mission, this one consisted of multiple buildings. "This is the Yukai Palace and also where I live," Yasaka told him once he was done gazing at the palace before she tugged on his arm. "Come on, I am taking us to a room we can talk." Right now he was in one of the rooms of the main building that was part of the palace which Yasaka had led him to. He was on his knees in a seiza position with Yasaka opposite of him, and she too was in the same position. A small table was in between the two of them, with on that being 2 cups of tea for each of them. "Do you wish to start or should I?" Yasaka asked him as she tilted her head cutely. Her tails that were splayed on the ground twitched every now and then, which was actually kind of distracting, though that wasn't the only thing that was distracting. With how she was currently positioned combined with her outfit, which he understood was a more revealing version of the usual kind, she showed off her cleavage like that. Perhaps the changes to him brought forth his hormones, as he had a hard time meeting her gaze instead of shifting his eyes downwards. "I guess I'll start, as you've been so supportive of me so far. I am sure you have figured it out already, or at least had your suspicions, but I am from a different world. Yeah, I know it sounds unbelievable." He muttered that part mostly to himself, as her expression didn't change with the exception of one of her short-cut eyebrows that rose. "Now, the reason as to why I can use chakra and why it caused you confusion is because for some reason everyone can use chakra where I am from. Even civilians, if they train with it, though they often do not. We can use it to augment our bodies. Think of increasing out speed or strength, though it's mostly used to create jutsu." "Jutsu?" "Yep. I am not sure how to properly explain it, but with it we can form attacks of different elements. We do that by molding our chakra in conjunction with certain hand seals. They aren't needed always though, as there are some jutsu that don't require them, but for a majority they are necessary. You want me to show you?" "Show me?" she repeated to herself before giving a slow nod, seeing that he smiled at her before he brought one hand up over the table with his palm facing upwards. He channeled chakra towards his palm, and Yasaka watched as within a second a swirling blue ball was formed in his palm. Yasaka marveled at the blue ball in his hand. It was indeed chakra. She could sense it, but it was different from the chakra Yukai used. She could feel it was much more pure, potent yet free-flowing at the same time, even when compared to her own. She reached out with a finger in an attempt to touch it, but before she could make contact he pulled his hand back. "Don't." He saw her send him a questioning look that was rather adorable. "The way it works is that it grinds away at whatever it touches, so if you like to keep your fingers, I wouldn't do that." As he explained this, he kept his Rasengan alive by continuously feeding it chakra. He was actually surprised himself that he was able to do it so perfectly in such a short time, and with one hand no less. Seems that despite the increase of his reserves, his control had improved by a lot as well. "I see. While it sounds hard to believe, the existence of another world, that is, I can tell you were telling the truth. Seeing that jutsu in your hand only confirms your words, as while I can tell it's indeed chakra, it has several differences between our own. So now we got that sorted out, would you mind explaining why we found you on one of our fields in the condition you were in?" Naruto saw no problems in that, and so he did. He explained to her that he was on a mission retrieving someone important from several powerful criminals. He even went to explain what sort of occupations the people of his world held upon her asking, so that during the end, when he and his team leader had cornered one of the criminals, he had blown himself up in a last attempt to kill them. He told her how his leader used a certain technique to warp away the explosion when the tear in space happened, how he jumped into it to assure the safety of his team, and that the only reason he had managed to survive was due to his healing factor. "Then I woke up here in the hospital, and you already know what happened after. That's very admirable of you, to sacrifice yourself in order to ensure the safety of your team, not knowing you would make it out alive," she said softly with a small smile on her face, and she truly meant it. "Thank you, Yasaka. Is it your turn now?" Yasaka nodded as she was satisfied by what she had been told. She also really liked that he called her simply by her name. "Okay then, can you give me a quick rundown of the history of this world and how things work? I think that information would be most helpful, as I could read books if I wish to know more of that at a later date." Another nod as Yasaka gave him a brief rundown on important events that happened in this world. She even told him about the other factions that existed aside from Yukai and their leaders. Throughout her explanation his eyes were wide open, especially when she told him about the existence of actual gods that were living. Wow, where I am from we only have a single large continent that's split up in 4 with several small villages spread through the lands. He mused, which was rather surprising to Yasaka before he turned serious. So what now? I mean, I need a place to stay but have nothing on me currently, and you said you wanted me to stay in Kyoto for now. Yes, that. I would like to offer you to stay in one of the guest rooms here in my home for now until we can get you something better, if you wish to stay in Kyoto, that is. He blinked at her. Really? You're offering me to stay here, just like that? We just met, aren't you worried I lied or anything? The kind smile on her face told him she wasn't. No, I am not. I can tell you are a kind person just by talking to you. You also have a warm presence around you that makes me feel safe for some reason. I do? He asked with a light blush. I heard someone else tell me that before but thought they were just speaking nonsense, so I guess we're done here. Correct. She rose for her kneeling position with him copying her shortly after. Come, I'll show you where you can stay, after which I will make us some lunch as I am sure you are hungry. Naruto didn't get to form a reply as she wrapped one of her tails around her arm and lead him out of the room, though he wasn't sure if he actually wanted to as he allowed himself to be dragged around by her. Naruto gave a light groan as rays of sunlight made its way past the curtains and into his room where it speckled on his face. He shook his head, his eyes still closed as one of his hands came up and began swiping away at his own face. His hand fell back onto the sheets and his face scrunched up before he curled into a ball and managed to lift the covers over his face. At last, his expression relaxed as he once more began to doze off. Unfortunately, he was unable to enjoy it for long as soon thereafter the sound of someone knocking on the wooden walls from outside of his room. And like that, the covers were thrown to the side, revealing Naruto, who was staring at the wooden ceiling with a blank look. Naruto-san, are you awake? He heard Yasaka's voice coming from the other side of the door, slightly muffled but still clear enough. Yeah. He let out a loud groan as he slowly got out of bed before dragging himself over towards the door, which he slid open to reveal Yasaka's form as she was wearing that same outfit she had yesterday. Morning. She greeted him with a smile, a light blush dusting her cheeks as she focused on his face and not the fact that he was only wearing shorts. Morning, Yasaka. He returned her greeting with his own mumbled one as his eyes were still half closed and he rubbed the sleep out of him. Oh, and there's no need for any suffix, you know? Since you don't mind me calling you by your name. All right. I'll do that then, Naruto. Her smile widened a bit. I was a bit unsure despite yesterday. Now, you mind putting on some clothes? If you do, I will make us something nice to eat. He nodded before raising an eyebrow at her. I will, though is it okay if I take a shower first? Sure. You remember where everything is? She received a nod from him. Yeah, I remember, mostly, but seriously, I think I can figure it out. See you in a bit. They shared one more smile as Yasaka turned around and walked off. Naruto watched her tails flail around in a controlled manner before she turned a corner and out of his view. Hey, he chuckled to himself before he slid the door close and grabbed clean clothes to wear for when he was done showering. Despite what he had told Yasaka earlier, Naruto was indeed somewhat lost. It wasn't his fault though, not at all. This palace was simply too big for the amount of people that lived here, which was just Yasaka and himself as a guest. Thankfully the scent of food managed to reach his nose, which twitched in response. His senses had gotten also better, it seemed. Much better than they already were before the change he underwent as he just followed his nose, which led him towards Yasaka. She appeared to have been waiting for him as she was already in seiza position in front of a low table with her tails calmly resting on the ground behind her. I've been waiting for you to arrive, Yasaka told him as she gestured for him to copy her and position himself in front of her on the opposite side. He did what she asked him to as he slowly sank to his knees on top of the soft cushion that was prepared. Smells nice, he commented once he too was in a seiza position and looked at what she had prepared. 2 bowls for both of them, one filled with rice and the other was miso soup. Thank you, I hope you like it. I think I will. Yasaka, itadakimasu, said Naruto as he picked up a pair of chopsticks and grabbed a bit of rice which he brought to his mouth. Delicious, his taste buds were treated to a whole new experience. It was like heaven itself was delivered to his mouth. He couldn't help but let out a moan with closed eyes as he savored it. He didn't think it was possible, but just the small amount of rice tasted better than even Ichiraku's. As he slowly opened his eyes, he was met with Yasaka, who seemed to be waiting on his opinion as she hadn't touched her own food yet, and she tilted her head upon asking. "It's delicious," Naruto said earnestly while licking his lips. "I've never tasted something as good as this. Well, aside from the food yesterday that you made as well." Yasaka beamed at his words before she began eating as well, occasionally glancing towards him and stifle a giggle at seeing his expression while eating. "Ha!" Naruto let out a blissful sigh once he was done with the food, the taste still lingering in his mouth. "That was good." "I am glad you liked it that much," Yasaka said as she too finished with her own food and placed her chopsticks down. "So, do you have any plans on what you'll be doing today?" "I'll be busy with my own duties here in the palace and occasionally visiting one of the shrines." "That's fine. I think I'll be reading up a bit more on the world and how things work. You've really helped me a lot so far, but I think it'd be wise to learn more necessities. Though should I head towards a library, or do you have books here that I can read?" "I should have some books here," she told him with a nod of her head. "I can bring you some later if you want." "Well, if it's not a bother I would be grateful." He scratched his cheek at her smile. "No worries, I'll come by your room later then to give them to you." Yasaka slowly rose to her feet and placed their empty bowls on a tray. "Ah!" Naruto snapped his fingers before a clone formed next to him, shocking Yasaka with its sudden appearance. "I'll have my clone clean up and do the dishes if you don't mind. It's the least I can do for giving me such a delicious breakfast." "You can create clones?" asked Yasaka as the clone took the tray from her hands. Looking at it, she saw that it was exactly the same as its creator. She could even sense it held chakra, and a decent amount at that. "Yeah, it's called a shadow clone. They're a special kind of clone that creates a copy of the original by having their chakra. They're indistinguishable from whoever it creates and able to do basic tasks such as cleaning, cooking and reading, all the way to fighting and using jutsu as well. A nice thing about it is though that when dispelled, its memories, experience and chakra are all transferred back to me. I imagine you can see its uses. I can pretty much create well over 1,000, which accelerates my ability to learn and train new techniques a lot." He finished, and the corner of his lips twitched upward upon seeing the awestruck expression on Yasaka's face. "That's amazing. You said it used chakra, right? You think you can teach it to me?" Yasaka could already imagine the time she could same with even a single clone. She could visit the shrines more often while her clones stayed in the palace. "I am not sure. You mentioned your chakra is different from mine, so it might not be possible. We can try though. It wouldn't hurt to see if you can." He then got to his feet as well, stretching his limbs from being at that position for quite some time. "Well, I am heading back to my room for now. I'll see you when you drop off those books you were talking about." With a wave of his hand and a small smile, he left her alone as he walked out. Her golden orbs followed his form until she could no longer see it as he slid a door close. She stayed silent for a moment, her gaze still locked onto the now closed door before she brought a hand up and held it over her chest, her heart to be precise. She could feel it hammer in her chest. It had been like this from the moment she had been close to him back at the hospital, and it only increased when she was in his presence. When he would smile at her, it made her cheeks heat up. Yasaka let out a small gasp. It couldn't be, right? She couldn't be falling for him this quick. It had been less than a day since they had first met. Yet, what she was feeling was a new experience even for her. While she was older than she looked, she was still young in comparison to other supernatural and even yokai, and she stood out for not having a partner. Of course, her being without one had opened the gates of offers for her hand. Yasaka knew she was beautiful, even as far as being considered one of the most beautiful women amongst the supernatural, and that had only increased the offers for marriage. Those who wanted her as a lover or to add her to their harem, but she had rejected them all, from powerful devils that lusted after her to both minor and major gods of different factions across the world. No, Yasaka did know that if she was going to pick a partner, she would make sure she'd choose someone who wanted her and only her. She had no interest to join someone's harem and be reduced to just another number. Which was why she never even bothered with offers of men she knew had other women already. Another reason was that she knew that most of them were lusting after her. It wasn't love, for she had never met any of them in person, and if it wasn't them lusting after her looks, it was the power that came with her. For while she only ruled Kyoto and the yokai within, it was still very valuable in comparison to its small size. So it wasn't that she didn't want a partner, mate, husband or whatever one would call. She would like nothing more than have children of her own with a man she loved. It's just that she hadn't come across the right person. But perhaps this time will be different. it had been different for her so far. Yasaka shook her head to clear her thoughts. It was something she could think over some other time. For now she should bring her guest those books that would be a good source of information, after which she too could start with the duties her position required. Naruto hummed a soft tune as he looked at himself while standing in front of a mirror. He was currently shirtless as he ran his fingers through his new appendages he had out in the open. He had almost forgotten about them if he were honest, and now he was watching his hand comb through one of his 3 golden-colored tails, somewhat awed by how soft they were, much like Yasaka's own when she had wrapped one of hers around his arm the previous day. Though moving them around was a bit more trouble, it wasn't that it was hard per se, more so that they reacted to the slightest thought, and rather erratically so. He was thinking of incorporating them in a possible fighting style, with that would be a while until he managed to gain proper control of them. Even right now 2 of the tails were swishing back and forth behind him in response to the one he was currently running his fingers through. I wonder, he let go of the tail which joined the others behind him. He tried to focus on them, eyebrows scrunching up as he attempted to form some sort of connection, yet he was met with failure as what he had hoped for did not happen. Naruto, I've brought you the book you want. His head snapped to the side at such speeds it was a miracle he didn't break anything. He froze, and so were his tails in the air behind him as he saw Yasaka standing there, at the doorway that led towards the guest room she had offered him. He hadn't even heard her slide open the door. Likewise, Yasaka too was unmoving as she stared at her guest, or rather his new appearance, courtesy of the extra appendages she was pretty sure he didn't have before. Why Yasaka? Naruto muttered in surprise. I thought you said you were human? She asked with equal surprise, though by now she had her eyes narrowed while focused on his form. Well, I am or was. I mean I wasn't before, but he sputtered before giving up and hung his head. The ears sticking out between his hair drooped, as so did his tails, as he was unable to give Yasaka an explanation at the moment. Without saying a word, Yasaka used one of her own tails and closed the door behind her before she made her way over towards his bed and sat down. Naruto, come over here. Despite the soft way she spoke, Naruto couldn't help but flinch a bit as he made his way over towards the bed and sat down as well. Yasaka frowned as she noticed he was keeping a distance from her and wrapped one of her tails around his waist, surprising him as she used her tail to pull him closer. Relax, I am curious, not mad, she whispered and smiled slightly upon noticing him already being more at ease, though she kept one of her tails wrapped around him. I know that you spoke the truth back in the hospital when you said you were human, so I think I would be correct if something else is at play, right? Correct. Then why don't you tell me? I am honestly interested, as instead of a single tail you now have 3. Her golden eyes looked at his face that held a thoughtful expression mixed with nervousness. I promise I won't speak until you're done. I am not sure. I mean, I'll have to tell you everything from the moment I was born, and I rather not relive my childhood. If you can even call it that. He let out a hollow chuckle that only made her much more curious. But, I guess if it helps, you've already been so kind to me, and it would only be rude to reject such a simple-sounding request. He then faced her with a broken smile that made Yasaka's heart ache for some reason. I'll tell you a story. The story of Naruto Uzumaki from his first memory all up to now. And so he did, and as promised, Yasaka just listened, as it seemed like he needed this, just someone he could talk about his bottled-up emotions with. A soft smile adored Yasaka's face as her golden eyes were focused on Naruto's sleeping form. She ran her fingers through his surprisingly soft hair as his head rested on her lap, having fallen asleep as he finished telling her his story. It was quite a journey as Yasaka came to understand the kind of person the blonde on her lap is. A selfless young man who only ever wanted to be loved. A young man who had been denied even the basic forms of affection from a young age all the way up to now. She found it admirable how he could still smile even now after telling her about his childhood. He hadn't even noticed that a couple tears had run down his face as he brought certain memories back to the surface, had rather kept locked away. Yes, he was stronger than she was by virtue of going through a childhood such as his and still look so happy on the outside. A perfect mask to hide that he's actually lonely and someone who wanted to be near a person for the fear of being alone longer. She couldn't help but be angry at his home and the people who could treat a child like he's some kind of disease, and was impressed how he could protect a village that had done so to him. Though, from what she could tell, this Hokage, the old man who would take care of him, though even that was a stretch, he seemed to have somewhat manipulated Naruto by giving him that little affection he craved and making sure he would strive towards becoming Hokage much like himself in an attempt to get him to comply with the village. Then again, What should she expect from a place where they teach children barely 12 years old how to kill as opposed to giving them a proper childhood? Yes, Yasaka's opinion of his world was low, very low, for even devils didn't teach their children how to kill at that age. Though, something good did come out of all of this. Yasaka could say she felt closer to him than she did before. She understood him now and knew why he didn't want to tell her the cause for his change initially and didn't held it against him. If she was in his place, she too would have been unsure if not afraid to tell someone that it had to do with the reason people treated you like a disease in the first place. Her fingers scratched the base of his ears that were almost hidden between his spiky hair, and she giggled softly as he let out a purr and rubbed his cheek against her thigh while still asleep. She froze for a moment as without a warning his eyelids opened and blue orbs stared up at her. He looked so vulnerable as she could read the emotions that flashed through his eyes before they were being pushed down, and his lips curved up into a smile. Instead of returning his smile, Yasaka sent him a frown as she could tell his smile was fake. In response to her frown, his smile dropped a bit, turning into a sad one. "Are you okay?" she asked him softly as she hadn't stopped running her fingers through his hair. "I should be. I've suffered through harsher times and came out fine, didn't I?" Staring at him for a moment, Yasaka shook her head as she trailed one of her fingers towards his face and rubbed her thumb over the thin, almost unnoticeable lines on his cheek. She laughed as he purred in response before blushing in embarrassment at what he just did. Letting out a drawn-out groan, he sat up, removing his head from her lap with a small frown as it was comfortable before he rolled his head to loosen up the muscles of his neck. "Say, is there a place around where I can train? Preferably one that's away from people, as I need to try my techniques after my increased reserves. While my chakra control seems more precise, I rather give it a couple of tests as opposed to finding it out during a battle where it can cost me my life." Yasaka hummed for a second or two before she nodded. "There should be a place you can train near some of the mountains on the outskirts of Kyoto. People don't come there often, and there's a barrier in place to keep the noise down and also casts an illusion to make everything seem normal." "Ooh, that sounds exactly what I am looking for. You don't mind if I use them later, right?" She sent him a look. "If I did, I probably wouldn't have told you, would I?" Yasaka then rose to her feet. "Seeing as we're done here, I am going to start with my own duties. If you need anything, you can find me at the right wing of the palace immediately after entering. Later, Naruto-kun." Sparing him one last look, she turned around and moved towards the door that led out of the room. Her tails briefly touched his face as she turned before she was gone, and he was all alone. He didn't say a thing for a couple minutes even after she had left until he blinked. Did she just call me Naruto-kun?" The blonde wondered if he had heard her correct. Oh well, he could think more about it later as he had some training to do. He felt rather excited just to test and see if his jutsu had gotten any stronger or not, and he really hoped they did. Naruto then jumped off the bed, created a clone that would read the books Yasaka had brought with her when she came here while he himself went out, ignoring the glare sent at his back while he did so. Ringed eyes, purple in color, overlooked the reigning village that had aptly been named a megacure. The eyes were narrowed as the owner of them turned around, just in time as a plant-like creature rose from the ground of the building he was standing. "Zetsu, any news on the whereabouts regarding the Kyuubi Jinchuriki?" "No, leader-sama." Zetsu shook its dual-colored head. "We've searched through the land of rivers and the surrounding areas but found not a single trace. It's like he vanished from the face of the earth. We even looked through Konoha and there's no trace of him there either. Indeed, though it seems like Konoha is trying to cover up that their Jinchuriki is missing as well, since rumors spread that he's on a long mission with Jiraiya of the Sannin." "I assume you checked up on those rumors?" "Yes, leader-sama. We tracked down Jiraiya, who seemed to be enjoying himself near no Kuni," Zetsu's black half said with the while half nodding in agreement. "I see. Keep looking for him. Expand the search area to K's no Kuni and look if you can find anything there." The plant-like member of the Akatsuki sent him another nod of understanding before merging back into the ground and going on its way. "What's happening to the plan if the search turn out fruitless, Madara?" "Well, Pain, if the search doesn't come up with results, have Zetsu search the other countries. Have him look for the summon lands as well, as he might be there," Madara said after appearing once Zetsu had left. His Sharingan eye, visible from the hole in his orange mask, was glowing as he spoke. "Have the others continue bringing in their targets. If worse comes to worse, I can pay a visit to a certain snake, as the Gedo Mazo only needs a small portion of Kyuubi's chakra." Pain gave Madara a simple nod as he understood. There was no need to exchange words, and Pain preferred it like that as he didn't like Madara. The man knew about him and was able to kill him if he wished to do so. He was also rather secretive with his own actions, often changing the topic whenever he or Conan would ask what he was doing. But he would push through it. It was a small sacrifice when their goal was peace. Naruto stood there as the surrounding area was riddled with scorch marks and lingering flames that licked the edges of several craters that had been created. He was panting lightly after having used every jutsu he had knowledge on, and even those that he didn't quite know perfectly. He was satisfied with the result though, as he felt that he still had a decent amount of chakra left despite already having used what amounts to several Junin reserves worth. Interestingly, his affinity for fire had increased by a lot, which he had found out after forming the seals of the basic fireball jutsu and ending up with an enormous ball of flames many times larger than the one he had been capable of creating before the changes to his body. And it was so hot too. He had removed his kimono after feeling the heat which left him in just his hakama as a light layer of sweat covered his body. He wasn't complaining though, as it was just another increase to his jutsu repertoire. Unfortunately, he didn't bother to study any fire techniques aside from the fireball one, as it was an element he wasn't attuned to beforehand. He only remembered that specific one as Sasuke liked to use it, and the hand seals were easy to remember. But it was time to wrap thing up here, as he was quite sure he had been here for a decent amount of time. And what better way to wrap a successful session off than by trying something new? Naruto held his hand out with his palm facing upwards, similar to how he would prepare to form a Rasengan. But instead of forming the spiraling blue-colored ball of chakra, he closed his eyes and focused. Searching inside of himself for his other source of chakra, and he wasn't talking about the biju. After finding it, he focused before he attempted to pull it towards the surface, his face scrunching up as it was much more dense compared to his regular chakra. He kept his eyes closed as he continued to push it to the surface, and due to that he wasn't aware of what was happening in the palm of his hand as a ball was forming. It was dark purple in color and incredibly dense. This much was evident from how cracks had started to form on the ground near his feet. Unaware of this, Naruto continued to feed it chakra until the ground cracked audibly and caused him to open his eyes and stare at the purple ball in his palm. He noticed his hand was trembling as he had trouble keeping it controlled, unlike the Rasengan which he could hold without any issues. His danger senses were tingling the longer he stared at it, and told him that letting it dissipate in his hand like he would with the Rasengan would not be safe for him. So acting quickly, he thrusted his palm towards the side of the mountain that he was closest to and watched as it shot forward with high speed. Ka-boom! A deafening explosion followed upon impact that shook the earth. The sudden gust of wind created caught him off guard and forced him to the ground as dirt and small rocks were kicked up and raining down everywhere. He kept his eyes closed until the tremors stopped and fearfully opened his eyes, which promptly widened to the point it was a wonder they kept in their sockets as he looked at the large crater that was now present in the side of the mountain. It was like someone had taken a large bite out of it. Glancing around, he took note that the barrier was still up and thanked the heavens, for it would have been impossible to miss an explosion of that size otherwise. No doubt it would have put him in a lot of trouble with Yasaka, and that was the last thing he currently wanted. While staring at the crater for a while, he knew he couldn't leave it like that, as that would simply raise too many questions that couldn't be answered without revealing the supernatural to the humans. And so, putting his fingers in a familiar hand seal, he channeled an absurd amount of chakra as he created over 100 clones and gave them the command to fill up the hole to the best of their capabilities, as he was left with just enough chakra to make his way back to the palace, or at least he hoped so as he dropped his head back. He remembered seeing a small creek on his way here and was planning on cleaning himself there, as it would be rude to return to the palace dirty as he now was. Picking himself up from the ground, he marched over to where he had discarded his kimono before leaving the area, making sure the clones would pop 10 at the time after they were done to not end up with a headache. Yasaka hummed a soft tune as she strolled through her home. The ears on top of her head twitched as she heard faint voices coming from the living room and decided to check it out. "Back already, Naruto-kun?" she asked upon seeing her fellow blonde in the living room with his eyes glued to the television. "Huh, Yasaka?" Naruto blinked a couple times as his gaze shifted to her. "Didn't hear you coming, but yes, I've been here for..." He glanced at the clock hanging on the wall near him. "An hour or so, a bit more perhaps." Yasaka nodded after hearing that. "I see. Did you have any success, as I assume you were able to find the area as I hadn't seen you coming by?" "I did," he nodded. "It wasn't that hard, and it was a success indeed, or partially at least, as I at least noticed I could go on for much longer than I had been able to do before. I just have to wait for a target to see if they are more powerful, but I'd say there if only from the damage I had caused to the surrounding area." "Really?" She mused as she walked towards him before she sat down beside him, curious. Did you have anything to do with the brief spike in energy I had felt coming from the north? It was gone in a second, so I think it had something to do with the barrier. Maybe. I tried a new attack and the results were rather explosive, so it might. No. Actually, I am pretty sure it was my fault as the attack was rather powerful, and I wouldn't be surprised as it caused the barrier to flicker off for a second or so under the explosive force. That's good then. Just make sure to be a bit more careful next time, okay, Naruto-kun? He nodded as she was looking at him with a pout on her pretty face. He also confirmed that she indeed was using the kun suffix with his name and making warmth spread through him. I will. Yasaka-cha Yasaka. He refrained from using an affectionate suffix behind her name. Her pout only increased. You can call me Yasaka-chan if you want, Naruto-kun. It's only fair if I am allowed to do the same. He blinked thrice before looking at those mesmerizing golden orbs of her as she nodded with a reassuring smile. All right. Yasaka-chan. He still sounded a bit unsure, but seeing her beautiful smile washed away his insecurities. Ha! The blonde vixen then let out a drawn-out sigh as she let herself lean against Naruto, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. She felt his freeze up for a second before calming down, though he did try to lean away from her, which she didn't allow as she kept her head on his shoulder until he gave up after realizing this is what she wanted. Yasaka was actually somewhat surprised with herself and how she was acting, a part of her telling her that she was moving way too quick, but she ignored that voice for now. It was nice, the way she was leaning against him. His body was really warm and welcoming, which made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't felt before. No doubt that his presence had part in it. It actually reminded her the thoughts she had during breakfast this morning as a blush covered her cheeks, which made her push her head more into his shoulder. A shiver then went down her spine as she felt her tails being brushed. Glancing down at Naruto's lap, she saw he had one of her tails in his lap, which he was running his fingers through. How she didn't notice this earlier she herself didn't know. As she sat there with him, both enjoying the closeness between each other, Yasaka knew then and there that this was something she could get used to, wanted more of, hoping he could be the one to fill the void in her life as her partner. It would take time, of course, for while she already felt rather close despite the short time of knowing him, she didn't mind waiting a little longer to turn their relationship into a romantic one. They both had plenty of time to know another, and she was going to make use of it as he was currently living with her anyway. Yasaka watched from behind her desk as Naruto entered her office, a small skip in his steps as he walked over to her with a small stack of papers in his hands. Here you go, Yasaka-chan. He placed the papers neatly on her desk as he sent her a smile, one that she couldn't help but return with how innocent and warm the one directed at her was. Thank you, Naruto-kun. She looked over the papers while nodding. Perfect, these are just the ones I've been waiting for. While Yasaka looked the papers over, Naruto had taken the time to sit down on the empty chair that was positioned on the other side of her desk, his arms resting on the wooden furniture as he seemed content just watching her work. Is there something you want to ask me, Naruto-kun? Yasaka looked up from the papers and at him. No, he mumbled as he continued to stare at her before he shook his head. Sorry, you're really beautiful, you know. And I can't help but just stare, he told her for what had to be the umpteenth time since meeting her. It never failed to make her blush though, much like she was doing now, as she could tell how sincere his words were. She couldn't stop the smile from forming on her face as he brightened her mood just by being here. It had been a little over a month now since she had found him wounded on the fields near the outskirts of Kyoto, and she could honestly say that she was glad he had come into her life, even if it was unintended on his part. The past month she had spent the majority of her free time with the blonde. Actually, thinking back, she was pretty sure it was any of her free time. She had really gotten accustomed to him living with her, though she had so within the first day actually. A week ago she had asked him if he wished to move out or continue to reside with, and she was rather happy he had chosen the latter. Living her all by herself in a palace this big was rather lonely. Actually, Yasaka perked up as her eyes shifted back towards Naruto, a delicate eyebrow rising as she saw him blush. Would you mind helping me out with this? He held his hand out, palm facing upwards as a small blue flame formed. It flickered a couple times before it dissipated as if a small breeze came by. Hearing what he was asking her, Yasaka couldn't help but feel disappointed for some reason, as if she had hoped he would have asked her something else. Shed rather here. The ears on top of her head drooped and a small frown adorned her face, though Naruto didn't seem to notice those as he stared at his empty palm with his own face scrunched up in frustration. So you know what I am doing wrong? he clenched his fist before reopening it. Brought out of her thoughts, Yasaka blinked before asking him to summon the flame again the same way he had done before, doing what she asked of him. Yasaka watched as once again a small blue flame appeared in the palm of his hands before, much like it had done earlier, flickered a couple times and then lost its power. And, Yasaka hummed, I think I know what you're doing wrong. From what I can see it seems that you're underpowering it. While it might be confusing for a beginner, you actually want to use a bit more chakra than you think is necessary when creating foxfire. I'll show you. Holding out her own hand, Naruto looked attentively as a blue flame burst into her palm. It was much bigger than when he would do it and he watched as shrunk a bit but didn't disappear like when he would do it, see? Yeah, Naruto nodded, so I need to do it within a burst as it seems to shrink either way. Correct, it's impossible to sustain the flame otherwise. Well, thanks for the help Yasaka-chan. Is there anything you need of me as I want to see if I have more success now? Yes, is what she wanted to say. I don't think so. Will you be back for lunch? Of course. How could I miss the opportunity to taste more of your delicious cooking? Anyway, see you later. He got up, waved her goodbye before turning on his feet and exiting her office. Once he had left, Yasaka let out a sigh as she slumped back in her chair. A thoughtful expression marred her face as she wondered exactly why she felt disappointed when he asked for her help. What was she hoping that he would ask her? Perhaps if had asked her if she wanted to do something with him, just the two of them, or if he would have asked her out, she would accept an invite to go out if it was him who'd ask. But alas, he didn't. More time was needed, she guessed. During the talk they had back then where he told her of his life before meeting her, she knew he was a troubled soul. She wasn't even sure if he knew what love is, at least so she assumed from what he told her. Love in a more romantic manner as opposed to one of a friend is what she meant. Oh well, she had time, much like he did. They could live much longer than any normal human, so waiting a bit longer wasn't much of an issue in hindsight. Still, part of her hoped it would happen sooner than later. Maybe she should spend more time with him, help him with his training and whatnot. Drop some hints here and there that she too was interested in him. Some more direct and hope for positive results. Hey Haim. Jiraiya greeted Tsunade softly as he entered her office via the window. A frown marred his face as he got a good look at his old teammate. She somehow looked to have aged a decade or two in the span of a month with visible bags under her eyes. Jiraiya. Tsunade greeted him with little to no enthusiasm, which made the Toad Sage flinch a bit. Please, tell me you have some good news. Maybe. Though the look on his face made her wary. I've run by some of my contacts throughout the nations and asked if any of them has seen a hint of Naruto, but they all came up blank, unless something changed with his appearance, in which that would be an attempt in vain. I have other news though, and this is about the Akatsuki. Akatsuki? Well, come out with it then, she asked impatiently. Well, the good news is that we can be sure he isn't captured by them, as it appears they are searching for him as well. Several reports of duos wearing black cloaks with red clouds of them were spotted all around the nations, and while I am not sure if it's true, but it seems they are panicking a bit after Naruto's sudden disappearance. Supposedly they have paused their hunt for the other Jinchuriki. I see, Tsunade replied after a moment of thought. At least it's something. I just hope that wherever he might be he's okay. The fact that Akatsuki aren't having more success than we do fills me with hope though. Me too Haim, me too, Jiraiya hummed. I'll talk about the situation with Ma and Pa soon. Maybe they have more ideas on how to find him. Not waiting for a response, he jumped out of the window the same way he entered, leaving the Hokage alone in her office, who stared at the pictures of her predecessors on the wall with a sad smile. A blush adorned Yasaka's cheeks as she was watching Naruto from where she was currently standing. She found her fellow blonde in the palace's garden, underneath a tree, and within the shadow it provided, as he seemed to be in a meditation of sorts. At least that's what she assumed, as he was currently in a lotus position. His hands pressed together, and the only movement being that of his rising chest with each slow breath he took. But that wasn't why she was blushing. No, the reason for that was because he was shirtless, giving her a welcome view of his lean muscles that showed off a light six-pack that was covered in a thin layer of sweat. Nothing too crazy, but enough that she wouldn't mind running her fingers over his abs in a similar manner that she had done back during when he was still in the hospital. Yes, wouldn't mind it one bit, and she unconsciously licked her lips in a rather sensual manner that could have enticed any man that would have seen it with his own two eyes. But it wasn't, as she was the only one here. Well, in Naruto, but his eyes were closed. Surrounding him were three balls of fire. Blue fire or fox fire depending on who you asked. The balls made out of flames continued to circle around him. Was this some sort of training exercise for him? It was a bit surprising though, as he seemed to have everything under control despite his visit to her earlier this day where he asked her for advice. Was he some kind of prodigy then? No. Yasaka shook her head. She remembered him telling her that he was rather the opposite, but seeing him now, that was kind of hard to believe. She herself hadn't even thought about doing something like he was now showing her. Then, without any sort of build-up, the surrounding orbs of flames were extinguished and his eyes slowly opened. He blinked a couple times before his gaze landing on her, and Yasaka noticed those deep blue orbs of his considerably brightened once they noticed her. Before she could say or do anything, Naruto just let himself fall flat onto his back, taking comfort in the cold grass against his sweaty back. He'd have to take a shower later anyway. Lazily he lifted his head after the sound of grass being involuntarily parted reached his sensitive ears, her Geta making light crunching noises as she would step on small rocks hidden within the grass. Letting his head fall back onto the grass, he sighed as he stared up in the green leaves that covered the branches. His eyes swiveled to the side as Yasaka came into his peripheral vision. She was just standing there, next to his lying form, her hands resting on her shapely hips as she flashed him a pleasant smile. "So, how long were you watching?" I don't know what you're talking about," she huffed. "Really now?" he inquired with a toothy grin, his eyes moving down from her face to the rest of her body, taking in her curvaceous figure that her outfit did little to hide. "Oh, does someone like what he sees?" She gave him a light nudge to his side with one of her feet. "Maybe. What about you?" Yasaka's smile turned playful. "Maybe." She let out a soft giggle and the glare he sent her. Lifting one of her feet, she lowered it once it was on the other side of him so that she was standing with one of her feet on each side of his waist. Yasaka-chan." Naruto sputtered at what she was doing. "Calm down, Naruto-kun," the kitsune woman said softly as she slowly lowered herself so she was now positioned with her knees on each side of him. He swallowed audibly as his cheeks colored red. "I said calm down," she muttered as she let herself go lower and lower, and for Naruto time seemed to stop as he watched her every move until she was no longer supporting herself and instead straddling his waist, simultaneously putting a stop to his squirming. "What are you doing?" He tried to look everywhere but her. At the same time he was forcing his lower area to relax as he didn't want a certain part of his anatomy to rise with how she was sitting on him. Yasaka just hummed as she sat there, head tilted slightly to the side as her ears were a bit droopy. She kept her hands close to herself though, as Naruto had become an unmoving statue. "You know," Yasaka began softly, unfolding her arms as she started lightly trailing her fingers up and down his arms that were laying limply beside him. His fingers gave light twitches at her touch but his arms didn't move. "I've been thinking." She caught his hands with her own, spreading his fingers before intertwining them with her own. "You obviously have feelings for me, don't deny, as I've noticed so from the beginning." Yasaka noticed him squirm underneath her at her words and decided to comfort him as she rubbed circles on his hands with her thumbs. "And I think that, I too have developed some sort of feelings for you." She didn't miss how his eyes widened and for a second darted to her before he once more looked away. "I actually began feeling them the moment we met but didn't think much of it at the time. At least, but, it seems waiting for you to ask me out is going to take longer than I would like. So," Yasaka smiled down at him. Her smile was different from the ones she usually sent him and it made him uncomfortable, though not in a bad manner per se. Faster than he expected her to move, Yasaka let go of his hands before she let herself fall forward. He could only blink once before he saw her face was inches away from his. Even through Yasaka's hurry he could feel her bountiful chest pressing against him as her hands were resting next to his head. He swallowed audibly at their close proximity, a healthy blush on his cheeks as he could feel Yasaka's breath against his face. Her eyes up close were mesmerizing though, as those golden orbs seemed to stare right through his defenses, making him feel more vulnerable than he felt in a long time. "So what?" he managed to get out as he could feel his lips getting dry. "So I've decided." Her face moved closer and closer to his and Naruto tried to press his head into the ground behind him. Her face was now mere centimeters away from his and he could feel her lips brush up against his cheek. "We're going out tonight, your treat." Yasaka moved her head back a bit and was met with his surprised stare. "Out? You mean like a date?" She nodded as he looked bashful with his cheeks a rosy color. "Yes, exactly like that. Alright, but I've never done something like that before." Not to mention that back in Konoha the girls his age were all focused on Sasuke, even Sakura who he had liked despite the dozens of times she had rejected him. It took until his trip with Jiraiya that he managed to grow out of his crush. If she wished to go after someone who rather shoved their fist through their comrade's chest, so be it, as long as it won't be on his behalf. That's okay. Yasaka softly rubbed his cheek with a couple of her fingers as she held a soft smile. It'll be my first time as well. Now that caught Naruto by surprise, as he was sure a woman as beautiful as her would have some experience, but apparently not. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but feel happy that he'd be the first in the same manner that she would be for him. Now, how about you go and clean yourself while getting ready for later tonight? I'll be doing the same. I will, he told her with a nod, and Yasaka sat back up. The two shared another lasting glance before she eventually got up, which had him briefly frown as he felt quite content with her on top of him. She dusted off her clothes before giving him a wave, after which she turned around and made her way inside. He watched her leave, his eyes appreciating her form until he could no longer see her. Ah! He let out a drawn-out sigh before moving one of his hands towards his heart lay and could feel it beat much faster than normal. Still, he couldn't help but look forwards towards later today. He had a date with a beautiful woman who was interested in him just as he was in her. A part of him wondered if he was still dreaming. Oh man, if only those in Konoha could see him now. No doubt they thought he was still an orange-wearing loudmouth. Hey, he cleared his mind of those thoughts. He didn't want to ruin his good mood because of them. Jumping to his feet, he moved to where he had thrown his top, which he picked up as he too began heading towards the palace. While it was still early in the afternoon, he needed to get everything ready, as Yasaka's suggestion had come out of nowhere. He needed to get some nice clothes and look around for a restaurant or something he could take her. Naruto looked himself over in the mirror for the 10th time in the past 5 minutes. He was nervous as hell, much more than he had been before in his life. Even back during the finals of the Chunin exams years ago against Neji, he had not felt it as severe as he did right now. He lightly adjusted the kimono he managed to pick up earlier. It was a beautiful white kimono jacket mix that had branches filled with sakura petals embroidered on it. With it he wore black-fitting jeans that made a surprisingly good combination, if he would say so, as he stared at his mirror image. The necklace he had won from Tsunade those years ago was on the display as well and finished his outfit. Glancing at the clock hanging on the wall, Naruto noted it was 7:10 p.m. He had managed to book a reservation in one of the restaurants here in Kyoto at 7:30, and it was only a couple minutes walking. The sound of knocking coming from the other side reached his ears, alerting him that it was likely Yasaka who's ready to go. He took a deep breath before exhaling slowly. All right, Naruto, you've experienced harder things in life. How can this be any worse? You're going out with Yasaka, the woman you like. At least she seems to like you as well, so you've got that going for you. With a light shake of his head he marched up to the door and opened it, revealing that it was indeed Yasaka who had been the one knocking. Upon seeing her, Naruto's mouth unconsciously opened as his breath was taken away. Beautiful was the only word he could think of as he stared at her, and even then he found that it didn't do her justice. There was just no word in his vocabulary that he could use to properly describe her, as she was smiling towards him with her head lightly tilted. He allowed his eyes to wander over her just as she was doing with him, taking in every inch of her and making sure to imprint it in his mind. She was wearing a yellow kimono with a black obi around her thin waist. The kimono had a white interior and was open at the shoulder, presenting him with a view of her huge chest. He had an estimate of how large her chest was due to having seen her in her shrine maiden outfit along with feeling her press up against him earlier this day, but even then he was still caught by surprise. You like? She asked him with a raised eyebrow, though the amusement that was twinkling in her eyes told him she had clearly seen where he had been staring at. Ah, sorry, he sheepishly scratched his cheek, but are you sure that's what you're going to wear? Why, don't you like it? Her bottom lip trembled as she asked him, and Naruto panicked, missing the glint of mischief that briefly flashed through her golden orbs. No, I do, he said quickly. It's just that I am a bit surprised. That's all. You look really beautiful though. Ah, such a flatterer, but you look handsome as well. Shall we go then? Nodding his head, Naruto exited his room and made his way out of the palace along with Yasaka. The streets of Kyoto were illuminated by the setting sun, along with numerous lanterns that hung of the side of the buildings both left and right. And walking through those streets, Yasaka and Naruto made for an interesting sight. especially for those connecting the dots as they saw them close like that with the clothing both wore. Of course, that is if one wasn't distracted by Yasaka's plentiful chest that was on display. Yasaka of course was aware of the eyes that were on them, more specifically her, but did her best to pay them no mind. Brushing a couple strands of her long blonde hair to the side, she glanced over to her date. Noticing how stiff he was walking, she frowned for a moment before that frown turned into a smile as she reached out and took his hand in her own, moving a bit closer to Naruto, who jerked at the unexpected touch. "Don't be so stiff, Naruto-kun. This is our date and I want to enjoy it." Naruto stared at her for a handful of seconds before he slowly gave her a nod and calmed himself down, his posture turning less tense. Taking notice of this, Yasaka moved a tad bit closer and began leaning against him, using both her arms to entangle with his own and press it against her body. "So, any hints as to where we're going?" Naruto shook his head. "No, it's a surprise. We're quite close though, so be patient a bit longer, Yasaka-chan." Despite pouting, Yasaka complied as they continued to walk for a couple more minutes. After turning a couple corners, they arrived at a small, cozy-looking restaurant and Naruto held the door open for Yasaka, who entered as he followed after her. They were met with a waitress whose eyes widened upon seeing them and greeted them before leading them to a table for two. Naruto pulled out a chair for Yasaka, who thanked him with a smile and accepted the gesture. She pushed her long blonde hair that was held in a loose ponytail and kept together by bandages as it was simply too long else. Once Yasaka was seated, he walked over towards the chair on the opposite of her, which he sat down on, staring at another from where they were sitting. Gold met blue as their gazes met. Time slowly ticked by as they just looked at the other until Yasaka broke her stare in favor of looking around the restaurant Naruto had brought her. Genuinely impressed, he had actually managed to find a restaurant that wasn't filled to the brim as it was usual here in Kyoto. Not too long after, another waitress appeared and stopped at their table. Would you 2L like to order something tea to drink?" The waitress, a young girl looking to be in her early 20s, asked with a nervous stutter, or at least that's what they assumed as they noted she had trouble meeting Yasaka's eyes with her own. "Yes, a bottle of Junmai-shu sake and 2 cups would be nice," Naruto answered with an easygoing smile on his face. He was sure the girl was about to faint if Yasaka were to address her as she was currently. Alright, I'll be back as soon." She scribbled his order down on a small notepad she carried with her before leaving the pair. Sharing an amused look with his date, Yasaka and himself let out soft chuckles. "Poor girl," Yasaka mumbled before flashing him a smile. "Still, I wasn't aware you knew my favorite sake." "I didn't. It's the one I like the most from the one I've had. I noticed our tastes are almost exactly the same, so I just gambled. Thankfully it seems my insane luck is still there." "Oh, and you have some examples of this insane luck, I suppose?" "I do actually." The words left him with such excitement Yasaka couldn't help but lean forward in interest. "How about I tell you about the time I got banned from a casino back where I am from?" Before he could start his story, the waitress from earlier returned to their table carrying a tray that held the bottle of sake Naruto had ordered along with 2 small cups on a saucer. "Here you go. Have you made any choice in what you'd like to order?" The waitress was still nervous, but she had managed to control her stuttering as she placed one of the saucers before Naruto and Yasaka. Sharing a glance with her date to see who would order first, he told her she could go first with a small incline of his head. "Well, I'd like a small plate of sushi to start with. You?" I would like the same. Yes, sushi for me as well, please." "Alright, I'll be bringing your orders shortly. If you have any questions, feel free to ask." The waitress gave a short bow before she left them alone. "So, how about that story you were about to tell me before you were interrupted?" "Right, well, it happened a couple years ago when I was on the search for an important person with my then teacher, and so," Naruto began retelling Yasaka of his story. It was actually how most of the evening went, him telling her stories about the missions he had done as a genin between their food, keeping the sad moments out as he didn't want to ruin the good mood they had going. Before either realized it, almost 2 hours had passed. The pair were laughing together as Naruto told her about one of his pranks he had done when he was younger. Empty sake bottles laid out on the table, showing that they both had quite the drinks, though due to their body being different from normal humans they weren't as affected as they should have been. Their time at the restaurant came to an end and Naruto paid for both Yasaka and his own food along with drinks before the two walked out of the restaurant back to the streets of Kyoto. It was much less busy than it had been before, By now the sun had set and in its place was the moon that shone brightly in the night sky. I enjoyed that, you. Naruto looked at Yasaka. The blonde kitsune woman sent him an affectionate smile as she rubbed up against him. I enjoyed our date as well, more than I thought I would honestly. Standing on her tippy toes, Yasaka leaned in and surprised him by planting her lips against the corner of his mouth. She giggled after pulling back and seeing his expression as Naruto brought one hand up and lightly rubbed where she kissed him. Unsure what to say, he just blushed before, much like earlier. Yasaka intertwined their arms and brought his to her chest. His blush deepened and he gulped as he made direct contact with her breasts that were still out for his viewing pleasure. Hey, isn't it cold like that? No, most yokai don't have an issue with the cold, you shouldn't either. Now that you're saying that, though I thought it was due to the prisoner I hold, I never really had an issue before I came here. He furrowed his brows together but wasn't able to mull over it long as he felt Yasaka tug on his arm. Naruto-kun, let's head back to the palace. Sure. A nice walk to finish the evening sounds pleasant. The pair started walking. Without any warnings, Yasaka decided to lean her head against his shoulder, which he didn't mind. She had a nice smell to her and he wasn't sure what came over him as he suddenly paused, making Yasaka lift her head and turn to face him. Yasaka was cut off as Naruto cupped her cheek and felt something soft meet her lips. Surprised Golden stared at equally surprised Blue as the owner of those eyes appeared to be as surprised at his own actions as she was. Yet, as their kiss progressed, Yasaka let her eyes slowly flutter close, fully immersing herself in the feelings she was experiencing right now. It was Naruto who first broke the kiss he initiated. He blinked a couple times as if not sure he had just done what he thought he did as Yasaka too opened her eyes, hers holding a glint of lust to them as she tried to lean in and be the one to capture his lips. It wasn't until Naruto softly rubbed her cheek that she exited the trance she had been in and the glint disappeared and in its place came a blush. Naruto, she whispered out his name as she ran her tongue over her lips. I am sorry, Yasaka-chan. I am not sure what overcame me. He averted his eyes downwards in shame. She softly squeezed the hand she was still holding. It's fine, Naruto-kun. He looked up to see her give him a reassuring smile. I'd be lying if I said I didn't like it, but, let's just continue heading back, okay? At his nod she quickly leaned it and gave him a quick kiss before she began walking, and he had no choice but to keep up with her or be dragged along. The journey back towards the palace was done in silence, both wondering how they would continue after this, for they both knew their relationship had changed into something much more. His eyes slowly opened, letting his blue hues become comfortable with the outside world. A grunt left him as he rolled his neck, only to realize that he wasn't actually lying in a bed, which was something he had assumed. It wasn't until he realized that an extra weight was present and on his lap, accompanied by a comfortable warmth, that he allowed his eyes to travel down, blinking a few times while he did so. He blushed when he had looked down as identified the weight as Yasaka. She was asleep on his lap, cuddled up against. His kimono was parted lightly, which had resulted in her head resting against his bare chest. Her arms were around him in an embrace similar as he was doing to her. Perhaps this was the reason for the comfortable sleep he had experienced last night, as he felt more relaxed than he had been in the past 2 weeks. He couldn't help it as he was enthralled by her sleeping face. Her pink, pouty lips were parted slightly and he could hear her breathing softly due to it, her warm breath tingling his skin as he unconsciously tightened his hold around her. A part of him wished they could stay like this forever as he felt warmth spread through his entire being. Letting his eyes continue their path downwards from her face, taking in every inch of her pale, unblemished skin, which seemed to be almost glowing with the small amount of sunlight that had entered the room. However, he quickly darted his eyes back up while sporting a blush several shades of red deeper compared to the one he had before. The reason for this reaction: one of Yasaka's breasts had slipped out of her kimono. The enormously large and soft-looking mound jiggled a bit with each breath she took, and he had to fight down the urge to not stare at it. It was hard, just as a certain part of his anatomy, as he couldn't help himself. He had an inhumanly beautiful vixen sleeping in his lap which he was romantically interested in. He'd be more worried if he didn't have a reaction in response to the situation he was in. He was internally debating whether he should push her breast back into her kimono, but didn't out of fear. What if she'd wake up to see him and accuse him of fondling her chest while she had been asleep? Or assuming it was him who had brought it out of her kimono in the first place? Yeah, he rather not. Getting his blush under control, he looked at her again. this time making sure to not let his eyes wander beneath her neckline. He gained a frown when he noticed some of her long, spiraling blonde hair was in direct contact with the ground as it had likely slid off the sofa. So he grabbed it, reveling in its soft feel for some seconds before lifting it so it was no longer in contact with the floor. A soft sound left Yasaka as he began running his fingers through her hair, his fingers moving upwards where head lightly scratched her scalp. Naruto-kun. His name left Yasaka's lips as nothing but a soft whisper as she leaned into his fingers, still scratching her scalp while also rubbing the side of her face against his chest as she moved her head from side to side. It was quite the sight, really. Had come to understand that she was somewhat of a flirty woman during his weeks here, not afraid of flashing him a bit of skin here and there on purpose even. She was a seductive minx if she wished to be, and it was certainly effective on him and she knew it. But now as he looked at her sleeping form, even with her guard down and looking defenseless as she did, he just couldn't help but be captivated by her. How she looked, it was just something he couldn't control despite how hard he tried and forced himself to. Perhaps the changes he had undergone had something to do with it? He didn't know, but it was a possibility that made sense, somewhat. The sensation of something soft pressed against his lips brought him out of his thoughts. He blinked a couple times to see Yasaka awake. She still looked somewhat sleepy though. Her eyelids were lifted just enough for him to see her shimmering golden orbs of hers aimed at his, which held a certain glint to them he couldn't quite decipher. Though even if he was capable of doing so, he doubted he would be doing so at the moment as he got over his surprise and slowly allowed his eyes to close as he pressed back and reciprocated the kiss. It was a bit weird. It was only yesterday when they had their first kiss that he had initiated, but it already felt natural. As he felt Yasaka slowly pull back, his eyes reopened and briefly flashed down. The action wasn't missed by the blonde, who seemed curious at the red that colored his cheeks before she too looked down. Oh, somewhat embarrassed, she quickly acted by pushing her breast, one that was out in the open, and jiggling with each breath she took back in her kimono, after which she let herself crash against his chest, a longing sigh escaping her as she did so. Naruto-kun? Can we go out again, soon? I really enjoyed last night and wouldn't mind a repeat. She tilted her head slightly so she could see his eyes. Of course we can. He flashed her a smile that sent a pleasant feeling spreading through her body. I too enjoyed our date. It went well for a first time. At least I thought it did. Though, does it mean I'll get more opportunities to taste your lips? They taste rather sweet, by the way. He reveled in the way her usually pale cheeks took on a rosy color before she nipped at his chest with her eyes narrowed in a playful manner. All right. I am just joking, sheesh. Yasaka huffed before blinking. Wait, does that mean there will be no more dates? No, he quickly said to ease her worries. Like I said, I too enjoyed our date and I'll make sure there'll be many more, as long as you let me, of course. As his words reached her ears, Yasaka leaned up as she captured his lips once more in a spine-tingling kiss. She brought her hands up and ran her fingers through his soft blonde locks while feeling his own wrapped around her waist. Of course I'll let you. You didn't think that after all of this I was going to let you go? Well, it was on my mind briefly, but he removed one of his hands from around her waist and scratched his cheek as he looked away. I understand, came Yasaka's soft response as she cupped his cheeks and rubbed soft circles on them with her thumbs. It likely had to do something with his past, at least that's what she assumed, a certain event that might be happened that made him a bit insecure. But it was all right. She would make sure to help him get over it, as that's what she was for, as a woman to her man. Even if he was still a boy when it came to his age, the things he had gone through and experienced as a child resulted in him being more than a simple boy. Age wasn't important to her or the majority of the supernatural, as long as they weren't an actual child, which he clearly wasn't. He looked much older than his age as well, which was a plus. She liked how he looked. His face held little baby fat and the thin, almost unnoticeable whiskers his cheeks sported. She had to look quite close to see them, that or directly touch them with her fingers, or when she rubbed her own cheek against him. Did she already mention that she liked his hair? It was so spiky but soft as well. The sensations she felt when running her fingers through those locks were one of a kind. Yes, if they kept their interactions up and head end up as her partner, Yasaka would be very happy. He was everything she looked into a man she could love. Hopefully it would also put an end to the requests for her hand she loathed. Pausing her state of thought, Yasaka moved her head so she could look at him to see he had a small smile on his face with his eyes closed. He wasn't sleeping, she could tell from the rate of his heart and his breathing. What she would give to spend the rest of the day in his arms where she felt safe. Alas, She had her own duties to attend which she could postpone much longer, and so, with a regretful sigh she removed herself from his arms and got to her feet, noting Naruto opening his eyes to stare at her with a brief frown before it was gone. "Are you hungry, Naruto-kun?" Yasaka asked as it was almost noon and so far neither had eaten anything since yesterday and had skipped breakfast. "Now that you mention it," Naruto said as his stomach made a growling noise as if to let him know it agreed. Yasaka giggled softly before giving a nod. "I'll make us something to eat then, you mind helping out?" "Sure." Getting to his feet, he was able to take a single step before he froze. His eyes were wide as he just stood there worrying Yasaka, who watched as he slowly turned red. "En Naruto-kun?" she asked, concerned as she took a step towards him. Then, without a warning, he let out an ear-splitting scream before his eyes rolled in the back of his head and he fell forward like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. Panicking with her own eyes wide, Yasaka acted quickly as she moved and caught him before his head could impact the ground. She wasted not even a second as she turned him around and let his head rest on her lap. One hand came up which she pressed against his forehead to feel that he was warm. No, hot was a better term to describe what she was feeling. Channeling energy, chakra, to her hands, they were encompassed in a light blue glow, after which she proceeded to place one of her palms to his forehead. She watched as his facial muscles that were tense slowly relax. His face was scrunched up with small twitches of his eyes here and there as she kept her palm pressed to his forehead, as what she had done had made her hand much cooler. It was a minute, but one that might be the longest minute in her life, as he eventually completely calmed down, his body unmoving with the exception of the rising and lowering of his chest, which had calmed down too. A deep frown marred Naruto's face as he rose to a sitting position. The familiar surroundings of the seal greeted him as he felt himself sitting in ankle-deep water. He grumbled as he staggered to his feet. It was unfortunate that his state of how he appeared here depended on how he was in the outside world. He waded through the water with long strides, his destination being where the kitsune was located and find out what had caused him to feel the pain he just did. It felt like his blood was boiling along with the sensation of his body being pulled apart by some invisible force, and it had hurt on a whole new level. "Oi!" Naruto called out as he arrived in the large room that housed the fox. He could already see its form lying there, behind the bars with its head propped on its hands, for it had no paws. The giant fox opened one of its eyes as its red iris found the form of its jailer standing near the bars before the very same eye closed. "MPH, what do you want, brat?" Naruto rolled his eye at the large fox and ignored how it addressed him. "I am quite sure you know what happened that caused me to end up here. Care telling me? The faster you do, the quicker I am out of here and you'll have your silence back." Silence reigned for a couple seconds, likely due to the fox considering whether or not it should indulge such information before deciding that it liked its silence more than the information was worth. "The pain you felt was because you were being reverse summoned, or attempted to, at least, as the invoker failed, as the chakra required is even more than I have." "I see," Naruto muttered as he looked down in thought. "I guess I should expect for it to happen again soon. Knowing who is summoning me, or at least trying to, I doubt a failed attempt will be enough to sat them. Is there anything I can do to not have it happen? I'd rather not experience that pain again." "I do not know of such ways. Perhaps if you were a seal master you would be able to create a seal that would break the connection, but since you aren't, you're out of luck." That really sucks." He clicked his tongue as he cursed beneath his breath. He didn't even bother to look back up towards the fox as his form slowly disappeared from the seal. When Naruto blinked his eyes open, the first thing he saw was the concerned expression on Yasaka's face as he felt one of her hands placed against his forehead, which gave off a welcome cold as he felt that his entire body was way warmer than usual. "Ah, Naruto-kun. Are you okay?" Yasaka immediately asked him after letting out a gasp when she noticed he regained consciousness. Despite his vision still being somewhat blurry, Naruto managed to give a weak nod as he pressed his head deeper into her lap as it was like a soft cushion. I think so," he rasped out. "Hey, I don't think I am able to help you out in the kitchen right now," he chuckled, which was joined by Yasaka, who giggled softly as she shook her head. "It's fine, your health is more important." She lifted his head from her lap, positioning him in a sitting position as she stood up before helping him to his feet and walking him over back to the sofa, where she gently pushed him down. "I'll go make us some lunch. After that, you mind telling me what caused this?" Looking at her, he could see the genuine concern she had for him, which was rather touching as he nodded. "Of course." "Good, I'll be back soon with our lunch, don't go anywhere." She failed to stifle a chuckle at the look he sent her before she left the room. Watching her leave, he couldn't help but notice the graceful and seductive manner in how she moved and was unsure if she did so deliberately or not. Regardless of the answer, it was nice on the eyes as she was still wearing that very same kimono from yesterday evening that clung and highlighted her figure that aroused jealousy in any women, especially those of the supernatural world. And to think that of all the people she could have picked, she'd choose him. Perhaps this was some higher being's way to apologize for his childhood and life in general before this? If it is, he welcomed it, honest. He doubted he'd end up with someone else otherwise. Since he had been a child, he wanted someone that cared about him and someone he could care about, a family of his own which he had yearned for after watching everyone around him with one and he was left alone. Even back when he was staying in the orphanage, they had managed to make him feel like there was no one for him, even excluding him from any activities they would do. It was painful back then, and it was painful right now even thinking about it. Lost in his thoughts, he wasn't aware of how much time seemed to have passed until the scent of food reached his nostrils and he sniffed a few times as he returned to the outside world. And as he did so, he was greeted with the sight of Yasaka walking back into the room, her head moving lightly from side to side with each step she took. She was carrying a tray on which he could see 2 bowls and 2 plates, which were the source of the delicious smell that had by now filled the room. "I've returned." Yasaka placed the tray down as she sat down next to him. "You seem to be doing much better now." At her question, he diverted his attention from the delicious-looking and smelling food to her, where he gave her a nod. "Because I do. Still need to loosen up some of my muscles though. Probably take a long, warm bath or something later." He accepted the bowl Yasaka held out for him, staring at its content, which consisted of steamed rice, pieces of chicken, egg and green onion, which was used to finish the dish. He licked his lips while his fingers twitched as he took the chopsticks in his hand. Before he dug in, he thanked Yasaka for making the dish, which was returned by her smile as they began eating together in a comfortable silence. "You know," Yasaka spoke up as she played around with her food a bit to tell him something, "there's a onsen not too far from here. The hot water works wonders if you need to loosen up your tense muscles. I've used it plenty of times myself after certain days that had me tired, so if you want to I can arrange something." She looked at him and waited for his response. I would like that. It's much better than a simple bath, so if you could, I would be grateful." "All right. I'll send someone over after we're done with the food." Flashing him a smile, she returned to her food just as he was doing. The door opened as Naruto entered the area that held the onsen. Already he could feel the change in temperature as the air was filled with steam that he could feel directly on his bare chest. He was naked with the exception of the towel around his waist and was pleasantly surprised to see that no one was here aside from himself. A quick look around showed that the area surrounding the onsen was nice as well. A forest began not too far away, which was separated by a small creek that ran in front of it. It gave off a calming sensation that was rather pleasant. Deciding that he had wasted enough time staring and that he could do so while actually enjoying the onsen itself, he made his way towards it, where he proceeded to undo the towel and placing it down on a nearby stone neatly folded. Naruto tested the water by brushing his feet against the surface, noticing the water was hot but not in an uncomfortable way, so with that in mind he sank one feet in first before following with the other. A long, drawn-out sigh left his throat and he closed his eyes as he was submerged from the waist down in the comfortably hot water. After a minute passed, or at least that's what he estimated, he opened his eyes before slowly making his way towards the edge of the onsen, the side that would provide him with the beautiful view of nature. He rested his arms on the tile flooring that surrounding the onsen, after which he rested his chin on his arms. Time ticked by as he stayed in that position. His eyes had closed, but he wasn't sleeping, just resting, though his awareness was severely less as he kept his mind empty of any thoughts. A pair of slender arms wrapped around him from behind, followed by the feeling of 2 very large, soft and squishy mounds that were then pressed against his back with 2 smaller nubs that he could also clearly feel against his bare skin. It caused him to jolt up and freeze as he swallowed. He couldn't find any words, and what left his mouth were mere stutters as he could feel the 2 mounds move up and down against him. He. A soft, mellifluous giggle met his ears as he quickly recognized the owner of the voice. "Why, Yasaka?" he asked, and his answer came in the form of those same mounds moving up and down against his back once more. What are you doing?" He was still unable to get his nerves under control as this was the first time experiencing something such as this. What do you mean?" Despite his current state, he didn't miss the teasing tone her words held, and a part of him wanted to turn around, but a certain part of his anatomy had risen and that was a bit embarrassing to him at least. "Well, why are you here?" He shivered as he felt her hands rub up and down his stomach. "Oh, didn't I tell you it was mixed bathing? Oops. Guess I forgot." While the words she spoke made it sound like she was sorry, the way she delivered them clearly showed she had done so on purpose. He felt her remove her hands from around him, and then before he knew it she had spun him around. It happened so fast and unexpected he was unprepared when he laid his eyes on Yasaka's naked form. His eyes unable to look anywhere else as he was able to see a sight of what must be been the most beautiful thing in the world. She was at least the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Completely naked, her breasts were even larger than he could have guessed. Even earlier today when he caught a glimpse it didn't measure up to seeing those same two mounds right now. They were as big as own head and for reason wondered if it didn't hurt carrying those two around. He briefly lowered his eyes to her flat stomach before moving up, staying a couple seconds more on her chest before finally reaching her face, which was dusted by a pink hue on her cheeks, not comparable to his own crimson blush, and he placed one of his hands near his crotch to hide the reaction he had gotten from both seeing her and of her feeling him up earlier. "You like?" Yasaka asked as she pushed her breast up with an arm before letting them fall and jiggle. Naruto didn't answer, or rather was unable to, but she knew that he liked what he was seeing as his eyes were still on her form, which she couldn't help but enjoy. Naruto tried to take a step back but forget that he was already at the edge of the onsen and so didn't get very far as Yasaka took a step closer until she stood in front of him. There was an inch or so of air between where her breast would touch his chest, which could be closed by her leaning forward, though she abstained from doing so. Hee. Again she let out soft laughter as she looked him over as well, her tongue coming out and wetting her lips. "I too like what I am seeing." She reached out and ran her hand down his chest but not moving beneath his waistline, and he couldn't help but take a breath at her touch. Yasaka, aren't we moving a bit fast?" "What do you mean?" Despite the innocent question, it didn't stop her from reaching out and taking his hands in her own, both of them, as she even took the one he was using to hide his erection he was currently sporting, as she then intertwined their fingers. Thankfully she kept her eyes on his face, which helped keeping him calm, or as calm as he could possibly be. "I am here to enjoy the warm water. I had no idea you'd be here as well." Naruto opened and closed his mouth several times as he tried to think of something to say, but nothing came to mind, so in the end he settled for a deadpan stare while Yasaka tried to make herself appear all innocent. "Naruto-kun, how about you turn around and I'll help remove some tension?" The blonde stared at her for a handful of seconds before realizing that they were still both naked and the water didn't reach past his waist, and it went a little further with Yasaka, who was a bit shorter than him. Still, he wordlessly turned around and positioned himself the same way he had done when he was still alone in here. Soon after he had done so he felt Yasaka press her chest to his back much like before, though much quicker and obviously in a teasing manner, as his sensitive hearing caught the soft giggle she had failed to hold. Her breasts then left his back and were replaced by her hands, which were delightfully soft as she began working his muscles. A mixture of suppressed moans and groans left him as Yasaka seemed to know exactly where she needed to apply extra pressure to massage the knots that had formed in several places. A relieved sigh left him each time she got rid of one, as the effect was immediate. Gak. Right there. His eyes rolled into the back of his sockets as her hands massaged a certain spot he didn't even know he had any issue with. But damn. It must have been some sort of highly sensitive spot on his body, as his back arched involuntarily when she dug her palm deeper at that area. Your muscles really are tense, you know? Much more than I was initially expecting." She paused briefly while continuing the massage, moving towards different spots she had felt needed to loosen up too. "No worries though, that's what I am here for, to help you relax." As the massage went on, Naruto got close to falling asleep several times, only to be pulled out of actually doing so whenever Shed hit a new spot. Still, it had him worn out enough that he could only nod in response to whatever Shed say. Eventually, and much to his dismay, her massage came to an end and he couldn't help the disappointed whine that escaped him. He let out a noise as Yasaka draped herself over his back. He decided to be considerate though and removed her from his back as he turned around and then sat in the onsen, the water coming to just beneath his neck. He expected Yasaka to sit down in the water next to him, so he was visibly surprised when she decided otherwise and proceeded to take her spot on his lap in a similar manner to the one she had when he had woke up earlier this morning. He was glad she had decided to sit sideways though, so she wasn't rubbing up against his member, which was the last thing he wanted to happen right now, or at least that's what he told himself. Yasaka rested her head on his shoulder as she her time and enjoyed the warm water on her naked body. "Oh, She opened one of her eyes and stared at his face as she felt him run his hand up and down her back. It was quite nice and she couldn't help but press herself a bit more against him. Naruto meanwhile was sporting a relaxed smile as he enjoyed the extra weight from Yasaka on his own. Something about direct skin contact with her always had him yearning for more, and he couldn't help himself as pressed his lips against to the side of her head. It really did feel natural, showing her affection like he was doing now, perhaps because she would actually return the affection he gave with her own. The two stayed in that position in the onsen until the sun began to set. How long that was neither knew, but it had been quite a while until Yasaka got off his lap and began making her way to where she had laid her towel, which was on a stone next to his. He followed after her, of course, his eyes occasionally moving downwards before quickly moving back up, unaware of the smirk Yasaka held. Hua, what a long day. He was in his room, lying in bed while busy staring at the ceiling. It was both outside and in his bedroom. The only light coming from the moon that was shining brightly in the night sky and entered via the window that was left uncovered. It was warm in the room, and so he had his window wide open, enjoying the feeling of gusts of wind that occasionally came by, and glancing out of his window he could see the slow swaying branch of a cherry blossom that was outside. Today really had been eventful, as much more had happened than he thought would be possible. His cheeks turned red as the image of Yasaka, naked, appeared in his mind, which he quickly banished. Yeah, that had been quite unexpected, though he wouldn't complain. That'd be rude and an insult to her. He wondered how they were going to act onwards from this, as like he had told Yasaka they were moving rather fast, though a part of him welcomed her forwardness. Her small touches and kisses she would give him were nice and something he could get used to. Glancing at the clock that hung on the wall, he could just make out how late in the evening it was as he buried his head more into his pillow as he got ready to enter the land of dreams. His eyes barely closed before they reopened as his ears caught the sound of his bedroom door sliding open. He muttered softly as he turned his head to the side after hearing the door being closed. Why, Yasaka? He called out as he noticed a pair of golden eyes that were glowing in the dark room. The moon had moved and was letting in less light in than before. Shush, Naruto-kun. She stood next to his lying form, and up close he could make out the night dress she wore that was see-through from her chest down before turning opaque once it reached her crotch area. He couldn't help himself as his gaze wandered down her legs as certain images began to fill his mind. He gave a grunt to show he was still awake. You mind if I sleep here, with you? After last night I am having trouble falling asleep by myself. Naruto was silent for a moment before he properly processed what she was asking of him, and a quick glance up at her face showed that she was being genuine with her question. Sure. I mean, I am not opposed to it. Last night had been one of the best nights of sleep he had and wouldn't mind experiencing it again. Something about a warm body resting against his own was very pleasant. After telling her that, he closed his eyes once more as Yasaka made her way towards the other side of the bed. Due to him having his eyes closed, he missed the look of mischief that flashed across her face, though he didn't miss the sound of something soft landing on the ground. But he didn't open his eyes as he really wanted to sleep. Lifting up the covers, Yasaka slid in bed and quickly moved towards Naruto, where she proceeded to press herself up against him, intertwining one of her legs with his while resting her head on his chest. She felt him stiffen the second her skin made contact with his and withheld the urge to let out a giggle. You're naked, whispered Naruto after he took a couple deep breaths as he could feel her large breast press up against his side, one of them even resting on top of him. Let's get some sleep, Naruto-kun. She briefly leaned up and planted a kiss to his neck before going back to snuggling against him. Good night, was the last thing that left her lips as she then closed her eyes and began slowly drifting off. Night, Yasaka-chan, he whispered in return a minute or so after she did, looking down at her sleeping form for some time longer as he had one hand resting on her back. His eyes never left her even as his eyes drooped before he too was asleep. Joyful laughter rang throughout Naruto's bedroom as the person in question was currently tickling the buxom blonde lying on the bed beneath him. It was early in the morning as rays of sunlight found itself into the room using the window and onto the bed's stoop. Yasaka let out a whine as she writhed on the bed. Her tails were flailing around and lightly slapping against him. It was brief, but for a moment she managed to control herself and took advantage of this by wrapping a few of her tails around his arms and putting an end to his onslaught as he had been tickling her sensitive spots. Her chest heaved as she took deep breaths of air, pouting cutely at that damn smile he wore while watching her. So, I guess this means I win. His white teeth sparkled as he flashed her a smile. In response, Yasaka smacked him in the face with one of her free tails. sending him down onto the bed next to her. Wasting no time, Yasaka rose before she sat on his waist, effectively straddling him. I don't know, do you? She tapped her lips with one of her fingers as she put up a thoughtful expression, though it failed to hide the mirth that could be seen dancing in her golden orbs. Lowering herself down, she surprised him with a soft but passionate kiss that sent a jolt running through both of them. She had let his arms free from her tails as she laid there on top of him, listening to the calming beat of his heart. It had been what? A couple weeks? A month? Perhaps a bit more since that night where she had slept in the same bed as him. It was such a pleasant memory. Since then, she had pretty much made his bed hers, as well as sleeping in a large bed by herself after experiencing the warmth became an issue. It just wasn't possible anymore. She kept moving about in her own bed, desperately searching for something or someone, to be more specific, that she could clung on to and share their body heat. In fact, the past 2 weeks she had been pondering about having him move out of this room and share hers. It was larger than the one they were currently in, as it was still a guest room. The bed there was both larger and softer, along with the bigger bathroom that was attached to the room. The perfect room that was just missing a second person Yasaka could share her bed with. They were a couple now, at least, she was pretty sure they were. He had taken her on several more dates the past weeks, which she enjoyed immensely. They had shared several kisses and a bit of groping here and there. They had seen each other naked multiple times now, even when not including the time the two had spent in the onsen back then. She was happy and could tell he was too. He was the missing link in her life that she had been searching for, a person she could trust and returned her trust with his own, her life partner, a mate that she would be able to grow old with and have a family with. Yes, the only thing that awaited them was to consummate their relationship. Something she had been looking forward to and fantasizing about in secret, though she was quite sure he had the same thoughts running through his head as her. She was sure he'd be elated to know that she hadn't been touched by any other man than him. While she no longer had her hymen, she never had slept with someone before. Usually she'd push through her mating season with the simple help of her own fingers, and she was looking forward to going through it with an actual person. In the past she had gotten numerous offers of yokai or other supernatural beings that loved to help her get through her heat period, but she denied each of them. And now, after meeting Naruto, she was glad she had, as she had planned to give herself to him either when her next heat period arrived or when they'd consummate their relationship, whichever would come first. Naruto-kun? Yasaka lifted her head, resting her chin on his chest as she gazed at him. Her fellow blonde hummed as he paused his hands that he had been using to rub her just behind her ears, eliciting soft purring noises from her. No, it's nothing. She gave a soft smile before resting her head back onto his chest. Oh, all right, he went back to rubbing her head as he stared up towards the ceiling. The pair was engrossed in nothing but the warm presence of the other, and so, neither of them noticed a brief flash of light that appeared in the room, partly covered up by the sun that was close to shining in Naruto's face. After the bright flash happened, a woman could be seen standing in the room. She blinked a couple times as she looked around, her long raven-colored hair following her movements until her eyes, golden like small suns themselves. The woman's eyebrows rose when her gaze came to rest on the two people she was seeing lying on bed, as she found herself in a bedroom of all places. Yasaka? The woman asked as she noticed the 9 golden tails swishing in the air behind the woman. Her voice held a regal tone to it, along with a commanding undertone that complemented it well. Hearing a voice that belonged to neither of them, Yasaka quickly moved into a sitting position while turned towards the source of the third voice in the room before a gasp left her parted lips. Amaterasu-sama. She exclaimed in shock at seeing the goddess who was in the room with them before quickly blushing as she wondered how long she had been there. Naruto leant up a bit, supporting himself using his elbows as he too looked at the newcomer. He had his eyes narrowed a bit as he could sense the strange aura of the woman Yasaka called Amaterasu. Gears in his mind began to turn, though he kept silent as he had a suspicion that there was more to the woman that he could see at first glance. Her name being the same as the Shinto goddess of the sun was something that had piqued his interest as well. You know, I've been trying to get in contact with you these past couple of weeks. Her eyes shifted over towards the other blonde who Yasaka was sitting on. She refrained from raising an eyebrow as he seemed a bit young, but I see now why you've not been responding. Amaterasu couldn't stop the corners of her lips curving upwards at seeing Yasaka's cheeks turn red at her words. Amaterasu-sama. Yasaka cried out as she felt embarrassed from her words. Hehehe, you know I am just joking with you, Yasaka. Still, I didn't expect this when I came down here. Her eyes flickered over towards the blonde on the bed with her, and Yasaka understood. Then why are you here, Amaterasu-sama? I admit I hadn't realized you've been trying to contact me as I was busy with personal matters. Yes, I can see that. As for why I tried to contact you, a while ago we registered an unknown energy that appeared here in Kyoto. Initially we didn't think much of it and assumed it would leave Shinto territory, but as weeks passed it was clear it did not. I wanted to meet with you and ask if you have more information, as the energy signature was rather large. Yasaka and Naruto exchanged glances, something that did not go unnoticed by Amaterasu before the blonde Kyuubi got of the bed, slightly adjusting her kimono as it was threatening to show Amaterasu more than she wanted to. Let's discuss this somewhere more appropriate if that's okay with you. A wave of her hand was her answer. That's fine. Will he be joining us? Yasaka gave a slow nod. Yes, I think it would be wise to have the subject of our conversation present. Huh? Was Amaterasu's response as she watched Yasaka leave the room. She then glanced over towards the other blonde, who too had gotten off the bed, as she processed the foxwoman's words. It wasn't until she was the only one left in the room that she snapped out of her dazed state and quickly hurried after them. So that's how it is, Amaterasu mused as she was looking at Yasaka and the other blonde she now knew by Naruto. They were currently in an office of sorts that was near the front of the palace. She was sitting in front of a desk while they were sitting beside each other on the other side. While I am glad to know it wasn't anyone dangerous, I still would have liked it if you had reported him to me. At least so we'd be aware of his presence here. I am sorry, Amaterasu-sama. Yasaka bowed her head. I was going to, but I've been quite busy these past months and forgot. With her head still bowed, Yasaka wasn't able to see the smirk on the sun goddess lips, unlike Naruto, who did. Yes, I saw you were quite busy earlier when I came here. Yasaka sent her a shocked look as her tail swished around, rubbing her own blushing cheeks while doing so. Ha ha ha, I am just joking with you, Yasaka-chan. A more affectionate suffix was used as Amaterasu smiled at her, though, I have to say I am glad to see you finally found a partner after so long. You seem much happier than you did last time I came by, so since you two are a couple, I can send offers I've received for your hand back. They still haven't stopped? Yasaka made a face as she stuck out her tongue in disgust. Amaterasu shook her head as she sent her an empathic look. I am afraid they haven't. Some of them don't seem to know what no means and keep sending more letters. She then turned to Naruto. You should consider yourself quite lucky, Naruto. The amount of men she has rejected over the years is impressive. Yasaka-chan here is a very sought-after woman in the supernatural world, having gained the interest of devils, fallen angels and gods from other pantheons that want to make her their wife. I am not sure what's different about you compared to those that came before, but I look forward to finding out. Are we done here, Amaterasu-sama? The sun goddess nodded as she stood up but then paused. Actually, I almost forgot, but why do I sense the lingering presence of death around you? I doubt you've come in contact with Shinigami since you've been here only a couple months. Shinigami? Naruto repeated as a confused expression marred his face he had scrunched up. His eyes then lit up as he remembered a piece of information Jiraiya told him during their 3-year trip. One of the few useful things he learned from that perverted toad. And it seems the two women in the office noticed as well as they looked at him to continue. When I was born, Kyuubi attacked the village. In order to save the village they had sealed it within me. He frowned briefly at that, and in order to seal it they had invoked the Shinigami to help, as it was too powerful to do on their own. So yeah, I am pretty sure that must be why, but I am not sure if it has any connection with the Shinigami here, though judging from how you were able to sense it I think it does, somehow. Interesting, but yes, I can sense that the energy is the exact same. I might visit him later and have him answer some questions, as he never told me he has done anything of sorts. He usually keeps to himself and sends out underlings. He also doesn't do much other than send over souls of the deceased in Shinto territory. Could you come back if you manage to get something out of him? Naruto inquired of her. It would be nice if he knows any way of entering the world I am from. You want to leave? Yasaka asked as she frowned at him. No, I didn't mean it like that. I like it here, and prefer it to where I am from, and hope to continue living here, with you. The latter was said in a soft whisper but was still heard by the other occupants in the room. Amaterasu smiling at his words and how Yasaka cheered up at hearing that. It's just that there are some people there who are likely worrying themselves to death over me, and I just want them to know I am safe and well. How considerate of you. Amaterasu smiled as she already began to have an idea of the kind of person he is. If something comes out of this, he'll be sure to drop by. That's all for now. Nice speaking to you again, Yasaka-chan. You as well, Naruto, and I hope the next time I come by the two of you have made it official. She winked at their flushed faces before with another flash of light she was gone. A moment of silence reigned during which Naruto and Yasaka stared at another before it was broken by the former. She was nice, much nicer than I imagined someone like her would be. Are they all like her, or is she a special case? Yasaka hummed as she thought it over. Her brother, Susanoo, is like her. Inari is similar as well. I haven't met others, but I heard from Amaterasu-sama herself that they are different. Aside from them, I know the Greek gods, with the exception of Hades and Ares, are somewhat eccentric if not a bit perverted. The deadpan stare that accompanied her words told him all he should. All right then, say, do you have anything planned for today? No, I don't. Why? Just because. You mind spending the day together then? I was planning on taking a nice, long walk, and having you join me would be nice. I'd like that. Where are you planning on going though? Bamboo forest. I read about it and wanted to see it myself. The weather outside is nice as well, which is a plus. Okay. Yasaka nodded, but let me make us some lunch as I assume we'd be gone for a while. Want me to help? He asked and got his answer as she took his hand in her own and walked out of the office into the direction the kitchen was at. 8 pairs of eyes watched impassively as the last remnants of Biju chakra was sucked out of the Jinchuriki of the 4 tails, his lifeless body harshly impacting the ground afterwards. That's 4 now, Itachi-san. Kisame muttered to his partner, having been the one to reel the Jinchuriki in all by himself. Only 5 more to go now. Say, Leader-sama, any update on our other target? Referring to the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, who's been hot news ever since he went missing. No, so far we've got nothing, and Zetsu has had no luck either. Thankfully the Kyuubi is sealed last, so we'll have some time. If it comes down to it, Zetsu reported that there's a boy trained as a monk at the Fire Temple who has traces of Kyuubi chakra in him, but that's only our last resort. Then what do you want us to do in the meantime then, Leader-sama? Itachi's soft, monotone voice rang through the cave they were in. Pain shrugged. Do whatever. Hunt bounties or something, and keep an eye out for any hunter-nin that are sent out after you. By now all of the 5 villages knows us and are actively searching for us. We'll meet again when the Gobi is ready to be sealed. With that he broke the connection as the holograms belonging to the rest of the Akatsuki disappeared until it was only him and Conan who were left. Wouldn't it be wise to have them help out the other members in capturing the Biju? No. Each of them have been given an assignment, and if 2 S-rank shinobi can't even capture a single Jinchuriki, then they're not even worthy of their rank. So far the only ones that have been trouble had been the Nibi and Yanbi, and that's only because their Jinchuriki knew how to harness their powers. According to Zetsu, the only trouble ones left will be the 6 and 8 tails, which I will get myself, as they too are able to harness their Biju. Especially the Jinchuriki of the 8 tails is considered a perfect Jinchuriki and brother to the Raikage, who I expect to fight as well. If you say so, Pain, by your leave. Hiya. The sound came from the training ground that belonged to the Hyuga clan. A figure could be seen there repeatedly lashing out against a log with quick pokes before finishing with a palm strike which caused the log to explode into splintering pieces. The person responsible for the log exploding jumped back as to not get hit, panting a bit as they had been at it for the last half hour. Hinata-sama. A voice came from behind her, prompting her to turn around to see her cousin, Neji, standing there with a frown. Don't you think it's wise to take a break? You've been at it for quite some time, and I doubt it's good on your body if you keep this up. Hinata shook her head. Sorry Neji-ni-san, I can't. I have to be strong for when Naruto-kun returns. I need to be able to stand beside him and perhaps tell him how I feel. Despite how much she had improved, she was still unable to completely rid herself of the stutters whenever a certain blonde was the topic. Seeing how she was determined, Neji could only let out a sigh. Very well, at least be mindful of your own health. It would do no one good if you end up passing out or damage yourself in the long run. Neji turned around and began walking off before he paused and looked over his shoulder. By the way, the rest is meeting up at Yakiniku for lunch in half an hour. Just thought I'd let you know. Despite not looking at him, Hinata still nodded. Hi, tell them I'll be there. With that said, she moved over to another log and began attacking it as well, repeating her previous movements as Neji left her by herself. It was peaceful. The only sounds that were heard were those of their own footsteps and the whistling of birds around them. It really added to the beauty of the place, as it was a great way to clear one's mind of their thoughts. I've been wondering, Naruto mused as he looked to his right where Yasaka was resting her head on his shoulder as she was leaning on him as they walked. You said you were able to transform into a fox, right? At her hum of confirmation he continued. Would I be able to transform into a fox as well? He couldn't help but ask as the prospect of running around as a fox was pretty cool in his mind at least. Maybe. Yasaka moved her head a bit so she could stare at his face. According to what you said and what we discovered, it seems to have altered your DNA and turned you into a yokai, so theoretically you should be able to. We could try one of these days somewhere secluded, as I am unsure how large your fox form would be if you have one. Right. I remember you telling me that yours is rather large, though I wonder how it would compare to the ball of fur I have in me, which is around 40 meters give or take, not counting the tails which are as big as its body. That big? Yasaka let out a gasp as she lifted her head from his shoulder. That's double the size of my fox form and then some, not counting the tails either. Yeah, one of its eyes is bigger than me. It makes for quite an imposing sight. A period of silence followed as the pair continued their walk through the forest before Naruto suddenly spoke up. I am just glad I didn't end up with those stupid-looking ears it has. A strangled grunt left him as he felt his chakra burn as if it heard his comment. Are you okay? A concerned Yasaka asked as she took note of his pained expression. Yeah. He flashed her a smile as he closed an eye, ignored the burning sensation that slowly tapered off. Is it normal for there to be not a single person here? I had hoped it wasn't busy, but we've been walking for quite some time now and haven't come across a single person. Yasaka blinked at his words as she realized he was right, and it most definitely was not normal. It's not. She straightened herself and became more alert as Naruto did the same, their eyes darting around, fingers twitching and ready to take action at moment's notice. Without a warning, Naruto's arm shot up as he placed Yasaka behind him. Holding in his hand was a light spear he had caught, which had been aimed towards Yasaka's back. I know you're there, he called out as he let his gaze roam their surroundings. No reply came, however, and no one showed themselves either, so with narrowed eyes he twirled the light spear in his hand before throwing it like he'd do with a kunai, sending it flying towards a seemingly random area in the forest. That was close. A male's voice was then heard and they watched as the air distorted like some kind of illusion was broken, revealing a trio of black-winged men floating in the air where he had sent the spear flying. Fallen angels, he heard Yasaka growl out from behind him as she stepped forward. You three. Why are you trying to kill us? Does Azazel want a war to break out? To her surprise they scoffed. Azazel? That perverted idiot is none of our concern. He's too busy playing with sacred gears and fooling around, and we had enough of him. If it wasn't for his wings we would never have followed him to begin with, sneered the four-winged fallen, which they assumed to be the leader of the three given that the other two only had a single pair of wings. Indeed, one of the two-winged ones said next, we had enough of listening to the man preach about peace and that shit. We're fallen angels, committing sins is in our blood. It's a shame you managed to survive though, but after seeing you I think we have to thank that blonde over there. While impressive that he caught our spear, well, make sure to kill him quick before we're going to have some fun with you. He leered at her, licking his lips as he was taking in Yasaka's form, pretty much unclothing her with his eyes. I take it we aren't your first target? Naruto asked as he calmed himself after hearing what they were going to do with Yasaka, even if the chance of that happening was pretty much zero, as he had no doubt she could easily dispatch of them. It appeared that they didn't recognize her though, which worked in their favor. Of course not, their leader said as he let out a pleasurable sigh. There's a reason it's so devoid of humans. Ah, their screams were like music to my ears, especially those of the women we wore out. Naruto sent a concerned look at Yasaka as he noticed her fist clenched tightly, as it was clear what they were insinuating what had happened here, in Kyoto, which is under her care. So having heard enough, Yasaka let out her ears and tails, reveling at how quick they shut up, and their expressions turned fearful as they realized they screwed up. Guessing that they were likely going to flee, Naruto moved in a burst of speed as he appeared behind the three and planting his feet into the back of the leader with enough force to send him crashing to the ground in front of Yasaka. Still in the air, he rotated his body and lashed out with another kick to one of the remaining fallen, who was hit in the side of his head and sent flying back, breaking a couple bamboo stalks with his body. The remaining fallen tried to flee after seeing what had happened to his two comrades. He didn't get far, however, as Naruto just managed to grab a hold of his leg and pulled him down before delivering a flurry of punches to certain areas of his body, mainly his arms, as he could feel his bones break from his chakra-enhanced punches. Meanwhile, As Naruto was busy with his opponent, Yasaka made quick work of the proclaimed leader who had crashed harshly into the ground by breathing out a stream of blue flames, courtesy of her fox fire. She made sure to hold back as she wanted each of them captured for their crimes, so when she stopped breathing flames it showed the apparent leader lying face down with his back burnt. His wings were no longer there as she had burned them off. Looking over at Naruto, she saw him standing up as another unconscious fallen laid at his feet after having been sent to the ground and having had him landing on him while driving his knees into his chest. Naruto dragged him towards his leader by his leg, where he then proceeded to drop him on top of him, exchanging glances with Yasaka as their third member should still be around, as neither had noticed him leave, creating a couple clones to watch over the unconscious ones just in case they would wake up as the pair walked towards several bamboo stalks had been brought down. They both could see an arm sticking out from beneath a pile of bamboo, which has Naruto raise an eyebrow as he was quite sure he hadn't kicked him that hard, but oh well, he lifted a couple of the stalks before, much like he had done with his friend, dragged him out of there and over to the rest. So, what now? Naruto asked Yasaka as he stood with her next to the pile of unconscious bodies with his hands resting on his hips. Can you spike your chakra? It should act as a beacon and result in some Tengu arriving who can take them in custody. Complying with her words, Naruto formed a ram seal with his right hand as he released his chakra in a sudden burst, more than enough to be sensed throughout Kyoto by anyone that's a sensor. It didn't take long before the first couple Tengu arrived, who bowed in respect towards Yasaka, who then pointed at the bodies on the ground. I want them locked up in jail while being monitored. Also, I want the rest of you to search the forest and bring back any bodies you might find. Make sure to tell anyone that arrives to join in. Naruto-kun and I will be heading back, and I'll be sending a message to Azazel and request a meeting regarding what has transpired here. Let's go, Naruto-kun. She tugged on his arm as they began making their way back towards the palace as the Tengu went to work. HMPH. The nerve of that man. Yasaka grumbled with a huff as she plopped herself down next to Naruto, where she proceeded to quickly snuggle up against. You talking about this Azazel person? Naruto questioned as he rubbed her back in hopes of calming her. Yes, came Yasaka's muffled answer as she buried her face into his chest, taking in his scent, which she had come to like and often helped her relax. I see, I take it you managed to arrange a meeting of sorts. He felt her nod as her arms wrapped themselves around him in a tight but welcoming hug. And what's been decided? He'll be coming here next week, Friday to be exact, to discuss the repercussions for what his men have done, for despite them claiming they were acting on their own with Azazel being Grigori's leader, the fault also lays with him. Do you want me to be there as well? He whispered into the ears on top of her head, making them twitch cutely before he gave them a playful bite. Yasaka jolted as her grip on him tightened before leaning back and sending a adorable glare. Yes, it would be nice to have you next to me during the meeting. Changing topics, do you want to move out of your room? Move out in what way? Where am I going to sleep then? My room, of course, she said matter-of-factly as his chin came to rest on top of her head. I think now is a good time, right? I mean, we've been sleeping together in your room the past weeks, and as nice as it is, the room is a bit small, at least compared to my bedchambers, which have been empty. We're a couple now, right? So it's normal, I think. Naruto chuckled warmly as Yasaka rambled on, silencing her as he leaned back and lifted her face by her chin before claiming her lips in a soft, tender kiss which was reluctantly broken. Sure, Yasaka-chan, I'll have some clones move my stuff over later. The radiant smile she graced him with assured him that his choice was the right one. Thanks for watching.